Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Weight of Responsibility. Max Davenport adjusted his rearview mirror for the third time in 5 minutes, watching his 8-year-old daughter Emma fidget with her seatbelt in the back seat. Grace sat beside him, scrolling through her phone with that particular tension he'd learned to recognize after 12 years of marriage. "Daddy, why do I need another shot?" Emma's voice carried the whine that preceded most medical appointments. "It's just a booster, sweetheart. Dr. Miller wants to make sure you stay healthy." Max caught her eyes in the mirror and winked. "Remember what we practiced? Brave soldiers get ice cream after battles." Emma straightened her shoulders dramatically. "Double chocolate chip?" "Double chocolate chip," he confirmed, pulling into the Medical Plaza parking lot. Max had built his reputation as a cybersecurity consultant by paying attention to details others missed. 15 years in military intelligence before transitioning to civilian life had taught him that survival often depended on noticing what didn't belong. The pristine medical building should have felt reassuring, but something about its sterile perfection made his instincts twitch. Grace finally looked up from her phone. "I confirmed the appointment yesterday. 3rd floor, Dr. Miller's office." "You seem nervous," Max observed, noting the way her fingers drummed against her purse. "It's nothing. Work stuff." She forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Let's get this done." The elevator ride to the 3rd floor felt longer than it should have. Emma chattered about school, while Grace remained unusually quiet. Max had learned to read his wife's moods like a tactical situation assessment, and right now, every signal screamed that something was wrong. Dr. Miller's waiting room was exactly what Max expected. Neutral colors, outdated magazines, and that particular antiseptic smell that seemed engineered to make people uncomfortable. They approached the reception desk where Agnes Freeman, a stern-faced nurse with silver hair pulled into a tight bun, barely glanced up from her computer. "Emma Davenport for her 3 o'clock appointment," Grace said. Agnes Freeman's fingers paused over the keyboard for just a fraction too long. "Of course. Please have a seat. The doctor will be with you shortly." Max guided his family to chairs in the corner, positioning himself where he could observe the room's 2 exits and the reception area. Old habits died hard, and something about Agnes Freeman's reaction bothered him. Her smile had been practiced, professional, but her eyes had held a flicker of something else. Recognition? Concern? Emma swung her legs from the oversized chair, humming a song from her favorite cartoon. Grace kept checking her phone, her anxiety palpable. Max was about to suggest they reschedule when Emma suddenly leaned close to him. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "we're in the wrong place." Max kept his expression neutral while his mind instantly sharpened. "No, this is Dr. Miller's office." Emma's small hand gripped his arm tighter. "No, Daddy. Yesterday, when I was playing in the kitchen, Mommy was on the phone. She said, take them to the other one. The doctor sitting inside isn't." She cut herself off, glancing toward Grace, who was still absorbed in her phone. Every alarm bell in Max's head started ringing. He'd trained soldiers to recognize when a situation had gone sideways, and his daughter's innocent eavesdropping had just provided intelligence that changed everything. Whatever conversation Grace had yesterday, it involved bringing them to a different doctor than originally planned. And Emma's unfinished sentence suggested something was wrong with whoever was pretending to be Dr. Miller. Max stood up slowly, his movements casual but purposeful. "You know what, guys? I think we should reschedule. Emma's been fighting a little cold, and Mr. Davenport?" Agnes Freeman's voice cut across the waiting room like a blade. "The doctor is ready to see Emma now." The timing was too perfect, too convenient. Max's hand instinctively moved to guide Emma behind him as Agnes Freeman approached with 2 other staff members he hadn't noticed before, a large orderly and another nurse. Their positioning wasn't random. They were blocking the exits. "Actually, we've decided to," Max began. "I'm afraid that won't be possible," Agnes Freeman interrupted, her professional mask slipping to reveal something much colder underneath. "Emma's treatment is already prepared." That's when Max noticed Grace wasn't looking at her phone anymore. She was looking at him with an expression he'd never seen before, guilt mixed with terror, and something that looked almost like an apology. "Grace!" His voice was steady, but his hand was already reaching for Emma. "I'm sorry," Grace whispered, tears starting to form in her eyes. "I'm so sorry, Max. They said if I didn't bring her, they would." She never finished the sentence. The orderly moved faster than his size suggested possible, reaching for Emma while Agnes Freeman produced a syringe from seemingly nowhere. But Max Davenport hadn't survived 3 tours in Afghanistan and built a successful security business by freezing in crisis situations. His training kicked in like muscle memory. Max swept Emma behind him with his left arm, while his right hand caught the orderly's wrist, twisting it in a way that sent the larger man stumbling backward into a rack of medical brochures. The second nurse lunged forward, but Max's elbow met her solar plexus with precision born of years of close-quarters combat training. "Emma, get to the stairs," he shouted, but Agnes Freeman was already moving to block their path, syringe raised. Max's mind processed the scene in tactical slow motion. 3 hostiles, 2 exits blocked, 1 protected asset, Emma, and 1 potential compromised friendly, Grace. The situation required immediate extraction, but first he needed to understand what they were walking into. "What's in the syringe?" he demanded, maintaining his defensive position. Agnes Freeman's smile was genuinely chilling now. Nothing that will hurt her permanently. She just needs to be compliant for the procedure. The word compliant sent ice through Max's veins. Combined with Grace's obvious coercion and the coordinated attempt to prevent their leaving, this was looking less like medical malpractice and more like organized crime. "Daddy!" Emma's scared voice snapped him back to immediate priorities. Max feinted left toward the main exit, then spun right toward the emergency stairwell. The orderly, recovered from his initial surprise, moved to intercept, but Max had taught hand-to-hand combat to Special Forces personnel. The man outweighed him by 50 pounds, but Max had him unconscious on the floor in 4 seconds. They burst through the stairwell door with Agnes Freeman shouting behind them. Max scooped Emma up in his arms and took the stairs 3 at a time, his mind already shifting from escape mode to investigation mode. Whatever was happening here, whatever had compromised his wife, it was bigger than a simple medical scam. As they reached the parking garage, Emma clinging to his neck, Max was already planning his next moves. He'd get Emma to safety, figure out exactly what leverage they had over Grace, and then he'd come back to have a very serious conversation with whoever was pretending to be Dr. Miller. 15 years of military intelligence had taught him that the best defense was often a devastating offense. And whoever had just threatened his daughter was about to learn that Max Davenport didn't just fight back. He destroyed enemies so completely they served as warnings to others. The war had just begun, but they'd made their first critical mistake. They'd shown their hand too early, and they'd underestimated exactly who they were dealing with. Chapter 2. Unraveling Threads. Max drove in controlled silence for 10 minutes, taking a deliberately circuitous route, while Emma gradually stopped shaking against his shoulder. His training had taught him that immediate extraction was only the first step. Now came the harder part of understanding exactly what he was up against. "Daddy, are we in trouble?" Emma's voice was small, muffled against his jacket. "No, sweetheart. The adults made some bad choices, but you and I are going to fix everything." Max caught her eyes in the mirror. "Can you tell me exactly what Mommy said on the phone yesterday? I know it might be hard to remember, but it's really important." Emma wiped her nose with her sleeve. She was in the kitchen making dinner. "I was under the table building my Lego castle." She thought I couldn't hear, but her voice got scared sounding. Max pulled into a McDonald's parking lot. Public, well-lit, multiple exits, and Emma's favorite comfort food nearby. "What exactly did you hear?" She said, "I can't do this anymore," to someone. Then she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Fine, I'll bring them to the other one, but you promised this would be the last time." Then she said something about the doctor sitting inside isn't. Emma scrunched her face, trying to remember. "Isn't the real one? Or isn't who he says?" Something like that. Max felt the pieces clicking into place with the precision of a rifle bolt sliding home. Grace had been coerced into bringing them to a fake doctor, And based on the professional coordination he'd witnessed, this wasn't some amateur hour medical scam. This was organized, sophisticated, and had been planned specifically around his family. Emma, I need you to do something very important for me. I'm going to call Uncle Andy, and you're going to stay with him while I figure out what's happening with Mommy. Can you be brave a little longer? Is Mommy going to be okay? Max's jaw tightened as he thought about Grace's terrified expression. The way she'd said, they said if I didn't bring her. Coercion meant leverage, and leverage meant Grace was as much a victim as a potential collaborator. I'm going to make sure she is. Andy Cantu answered on the first ring. Max's former Army buddy now ran a successful construction company. But more importantly, he was one of the few people Max trusted completely with his family's safety. Max? What's wrong? Andy's voice immediately shifted from casual to alert. I need a favor, and I can't explain everything over the phone. Can Emma stay with you and Sarah for a day or two? Of course. How serious are we talking? Max glanced at Emma, who was trying to pretend she wasn't listening. Remember that warehouse situation in Kandahar? Jesus. I'll be at the McDonald's on 5th Street in 15 minutes. How did you? Because you always think tactically, and that's the closest secure public location to the medical district. Emma likes the playground there. Max almost smiled despite everything. Good soldiers develop predictable patterns because predictable patterns kept them alive. 15 minutes. While they waited, Max called his office and activated what he privately called his nuclear option, a comprehensive digital investigation package that would take apart every aspect of the medical practice, Dr. Miller's credentials, staff backgrounds, and financial connections. His cybersecurity business gave him access to databases and analysis tools that would make most private investigators weep with envy. Andy arrived exactly on time, his truck squealing into the parking lot with Sarah already in the passenger seat. Emma perked up at seeing her honorary aunt and uncle, but Max could see the lingering fear in her eyes. Uncle Andy's going to take you to see the new horses at his farm, Max told her, crouching down to her level. And I'll come get you as soon as I've fixed everything with Mommy. Emma hugged him tightly. Promise you'll be careful? I promise. He kissed her forehead, then stood to face Andy. I'll call with updates. Andy's expression was grim. How bad? Bad enough that I need you armed and ready to run if I don't check in every 12 hours. Copy that. Max watched them drive away, then sat in his car and activated his investigative protocols. Within 30 minutes, his computer had delivered a preliminary report that made his blood run cold. Dr. Miller's medical license had been suspended 6 months ago for irregularities in patient treatment protocols. The Dr. Miller currently seeing patients was someone else entirely. Roman Baird, whose credentials showed a history of working in what the report carefully termed private medical facilities in countries with questionable human rights records. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the financial analysis showing that Grace had been receiving monthly payments of $5,000 from a shell corporation that traced back to the same network funding the fake medical practice. Max stared at the screen, feeling something cold settle in his chest. Grace hadn't just been coerced, she'd been paid. For months. Which meant whatever was happening to Emma wasn't a one-time event. It was part of an ongoing operation that his wife had been facilitating. His phone rang. Grace's number. Max, please, you have to bring Emma back. They're going to. Going to what? Max's voice was steel. Kill you? Like they were going to drug our daughter. Grace's sob came through the phone, clearly. You don't understand. They have photos, videos, evidence of things I never did but that they made look real. If I don't cooperate, they'll destroy everything. My job, our reputation, your security clearance. Emma would grow up with parents in prison for crimes we didn't commit. And the $5,000 a month? Was that also coercion? The silence stretched long enough that Max had his answer. They said it was compensation for the stress, for keeping quiet about Emma's special medical needs. They said she was part of a study for gifted children, that the treatments would help her. What treatments, Grace? Max's voice cut through her explanation like a blade. What exactly have you been letting them do to our daughter? Blood draws. Cognitive tests. They said she was exceptional, that they were tracking development patterns in high IQ children. It seemed harmless, and the money meant Emma could go to that private school. Max ended the call. He'd heard enough. Emma wasn't just a victim. She was a test subject. And based on the coordination he'd witnessed today, along with the sophisticated financial and identity fraud networks, he was looking at something much larger than medical malpractice. This was human experimentation, possibly human trafficking, operating under the cover of legitimate medical care. He called a number he hadn't used in 5 years. Nathaniel Floyd speaking. "Nate, it's Max Davenport." Nathaniel Floyd had been Max's commanding officer during his last tour. After retirement, he joined the FBI's Organized Crime Task Force. More importantly, he was someone who understood that sometimes official channels moved too slowly to save lives. "Max, I thought you'd gone full civilian. I need a favor. Off the books. About what looks like a human trafficking operation using medical facilities as fronts. They've been experimenting on my daughter. Jesus Christ." Location. Max provided the details, then added, "Nate, they have my wife compromised. Blackmail and financial incentives. I'm going to handle this personally." "Max, you can't." "I can and I will. I'm just giving you the intel so you can clean up whatever's left when I'm done." "How long do I have?" Max looked at the setting sun, then at the detailed building schematics his computer had pulled from city planning records. 48 hours. After that, whoever's running this operation won't be in any condition to harm other children. He ended the call and began planning his assault. Roman Baird and his people had made the fatal mistake of targeting his family. Now, they were going to learn why Max Davenport's military record contained several pages that were classified at levels requiring presidential authorization to view. The predators had become the prey, and they didn't even know it yet. Chapter 3. Intel and Infiltration. Max spent the night in his home office, transforming it into a command center that would have impressed his old intelligence unit. Multiple monitors displayed building blueprints, personnel records, financial transactions, and surveillance footage he'd acquired through methods his cybersecurity clients preferred not to know about. By dawn, he had a complete picture of the operation, and it was worse than he'd imagined. Roman Baird wasn't just impersonating Dr. Miller. He was running a network of fake medical facilities across 3 states, specializing in what is encrypted communications, carefully termed pediatric enhancement protocols. Max's jaw clenched as he read through intercepted emails discussing subjects with exceptional cognitive markers and optimized developmental interventions. They were experimenting on gifted children, using legitimate medical practices as fronts to avoid parental suspicion. Emma's high IQ test scores from school had apparently flagged her as a perfect candidate. But the scope of the operation meant Emma wasn't Roman Baird's only victim. There were dozens of other children, other families being manipulated through combinations of blackmail, financial incentives, and medical authority. The organization had been operating for at least 3 years, perfecting their methods. Max's phone buzzed with a text from Grace. "Please call me. I'll explain everything." Instead, he activated the surveillance equipment he'd installed throughout their house after a particularly nasty case involving corporate espionage. Grace thought they were security cameras. She didn't know about the audio recording capabilities or the AI-powered behavioral analysis software that tracks stress patterns, voice fluctuations, and microexpressions. When Grace arrived home at 7 a.m., Max was waiting in the kitchen with a cup of coffee and a tablet displaying her complete financial records. "Sit down," he said quietly. Grace looked exhausted, her eyes red from crying. But Max had learned to separate his emotional responses from tactical assessments. Right now, he needed intelligence more than he needed to comfort his compromised wife. "How long have they been paying you?" 18 months. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "It started when Emma tested gifted at school. Roman Baird contacted me, said he represented a private research foundation studying exceptional children. The initial consultation was free, just cognitive assessments and genetic testing." "And when did it become coercion?" Grace's hands shook as she reached for his coffee cup. "The 3rd visit. Emma had reacted badly to one of their vitamin supplements. She was sick for a week. When I said we were done, Roman showed me photos." "What kind of photos?" "Me, apparently meeting with known criminals. Me, apparently accepting envelopes of cash. Me, in hotel rooms with men who weren't you. Her voice broke. They were all fake, but they looked real. Professional quality. He said, if I try to stop bringing Emma, those photos would be sent to your clients, my employer, the school board where I volunteer. Max's expression didn't change, but inside, his respect for the enemy's sophistication increased. Deepfake technology combined with traditional blackmail, backed by legitimate financial incentives that made the victims complicit. It was textbook psychological manipulation, executed with military precision. What exactly were they doing to Emma during these visits? Blood draws, cognitive tests, dietary supplements. Sometimes injections, they said, were vitamins. Roman claimed they were tracking how environmental factors affected gifted children's development. It seemed harmless, and Emma never complained. Max pulled up a medical analysis on his tablet. The blood work they did on Emma shows traces of nootropic compounds, cognitive enhancement drugs that are illegal for pediatric use in this country. They weren't studying her development. They were experimenting with artificial enhancement. Grace went white. I had no idea. I swear, Max, if I'd known. You took money to bring our daughter to strangers for medical procedures without my knowledge for 18 months. Whether you knew the specifics or not, you enabled child experimentation. The brutal honesty hit Grace like a physical blow, but Max needed her focused on reality, not comfortable self-deceptions. However, he continued, you were also a victim of sophisticated psychological manipulation by professionals who've probably perfected these techniques on dozens of other parents. The question now is whether you're going to help me stop them or continue being part of the problem. Grace wiped her eyes and straightened her shoulders, the first sign of the woman he'd married that Max had seen in months. What do you need me to do? You're going to call Roman Baird and tell him you've convinced me that Emma needs to continue her treatments. You're going to schedule an appointment for tonight, after hours, when there's minimal staff. Max, that's exactly what they want. They'll be expecting a concerned father who's been manipulated by his wife into cooperation. They won't be expecting a decorated military intelligence operator with 15 years of experience dismantling enemy operations. Max's smile was cold. Roman Baird thinks he's been hunting sheep. He's about to learn he's been stalking a wolf. Grace made the call while Max monitored from his equipment setup. Roman Baird's voice was smooth, reassuring, with just the right tone of medical authority and sympathetic understanding. A professional predator who'd clearly done this many times before. Excellent, Roman Baird said after Grace explained the situation. 7 p.m. tonight. Come to the back in trance. We'll have fewer distractions, and Emma won't be anxious about other patients. After Grace ended the call, Max handed her a small device that looked like a hearing aid. Audio transmitter. I'll be monitoring everything. When I give you the signal, you take Emma and leave immediately. What signal? You'll know it when you hear it. Max spent the rest of the day in final preparations. He'd identified 17 people associated with the fake medical practice, including security personnel who were clearly not medical professionals. The building had sophisticated security systems, but Max had been breaking into secure facilities since before most of these people had graduated high school. More importantly, his investigation had revealed the location of Roman Baird's real command center, a warehouse facility where they stored research data, financial records, and according to encrypted communications, Max had intercepted archived biological samples from their pediatric subjects. Tonight wasn't just about rescuing Emma and shutting down one fake medical practice. Tonight was about destroying the entire network and ensuring Roman Baird and his associates spent the rest of their lives in federal prison. As Max loaded his equipment bag with items that would have concerned most civilians, he reflected on the difference between his current situation and his military service. In Afghanistan, he'd fought enemies who were at least honest about their intentions. Roman Baird and his people hid behind medical degrees and parental concern while experimenting on children. They deserved whatever was coming to them. At 6:30 p.m., Max kissed Grace goodbye and watched her drive away with Emma, who thought they were finally going to see the nice doctor who would make sure she stayed healthy. At 6:45 p.m., Max entered the medical building through a service entrance, bypassing 3 separate security systems with equipment that officially didn't exist. At 7 p.m., Roman Baird was about to receive the most unpleasant surprise of his career. The predator had become the prey, and the hunt was about to begin. Chapter 4. The Wolf's Gambit. Max moved through the medical building with the silent efficiency of someone who'd spent years infiltrating enemy facilities. The service corridors were poorly lit and unmonitored, an oversight that spoke to Roman Baird's arrogance. He clearly considered parents like Max to be sheep, incapable of serious resistance. Through his earpiece, Max monitored Grace and Emma's arrival at the main entrance. Agnes Freeman's voice, sickeningly sweet. "Emma, sweetheart, how are you feeling today? Ready for your special appointment?" Emma's voice, smaller than usual. "I guess so. Daddy says you're going to help me stay healthy." Max's jaw tightened. Roman Baird was about to learn that predators who targeted children face consequences that courts couldn't deliver. From his position in the building's mechanical room, Max had access to the entire electrical and communication grid. Step 1 was always controlling information flow. Within minutes, he'd isolated the building's security system from external networks and activated recording protocols that would capture everything happening inside. Through the cameras he now controlled, Max watched Grace and Emma being escorted not to an examination room, but to a section of the building his blueprints showed as private treatment areas. Red flag number 1. Roman Baird appeared on camera, and Max got his first real look at the man who'd been experimenting on his daughter. Mid-50s, silver hair, expensive suit that projected medical authority, but Max's trained eye caught details others would miss. The bulge of a concealed weapon, the way his eyes constantly assessed exits, the micro-expressions of someone accustomed to controlling vulnerable people through intimidation. "Mrs. Davenport, thank you for bringing Emma back. And this must be the famous Mr. Davenport we've heard so much about." Max froze. Grace hadn't mentioned bringing him. Through his earpiece, he heard Grace's confused response. "My husband isn't here. He's at work." Roman Baird's smile was predatory. "Oh, but he is here. In fact, he's been here for quite some time. Mr. Davenport, would you please join us? Your family is waiting." The cameras Max thought he'd controlled suddenly shifted focus, pointing directly at his location. Backup systems he hadn't detected activated. Professional-grade countermeasures that suggested Roman Baird had dealt with capable opponents before. Max's tactical mind instantly recalibrated. This wasn't an ambush. It was a trap that had been prepared specifically for him, which meant they'd known exactly who he was from the beginning. His earpiece crackled. "Mr. Davenport, you have 30 seconds to join your family, or Emma will receive her next treatment, whether you're present or not." Max emerged from the mechanical room to find 3 men in tactical gear waiting for him, professional-grade weapons aimed with the confidence of experienced operators. Not medical staff, mercenaries. Hands visible, move slowly, the lead operative instructed. Max complied, but his mind was already working through contingency plans. The quality of their equipment and coordination suggested military or intelligence backgrounds. Roman Baird hadn't just been running medical experiments. He'd been building a paramilitary organization. The conference room where they led him contained a setup that made his stomach turn. Emma strapped to what looked like a medical chair, various monitors attached to her small body, while Grace stood nearby with tears streaming down her face. But what chilled Max's blood was the presence of 6 other children in similar restraints, all appearing sedated or unconscious. "Welcome, Mr. Davenport, to the real operation," Roman Baird said, his medical persona dropping completely. "Did you really think we'd been running a simple medical scam? That we'd choose subjects randomly?" Max kept his expression neutral while cataloging every detail. 7 children total, 5 adults besides Roman Baird, multiple exits, and Emma was conscious and alert, which meant they hadn't drugged her yet. "What do you want?" "Your cooperation. You see, Emma represents a breakthrough in our research. Her cognitive baseline, combined with 18 months of enhancement protocols, has produced remarkable results. But we need a final phase of testing that requires parental consent. You've been experimenting on children." Roman Baird's shrug was casual. "We've been advancing human cognitive potential. Do you know what your daughter's IQ tested at last week? 180. That's not natural development. That's the result of carefully applied enhancement therapy. Max felt the world shift. Emma's recent improvements in school, her sudden interest in complex puzzles, the way she'd started asking questions about quantum physics after watching a documentary. It hadn't been natural development. The enhancements are temporary without continued treatment, Roman Baird continued. But the final protocol will make them permanent. Emma could be the first truly enhanced human, capable of intellectual feats that would revolutionize science, technology, even human evolution itself. And the other children? Previous test subjects. Some responded better than others. Roman Baird's clinical detachment was monstrous. We've refined our techniques considerably. Max looked at the unconscious children, then at Emma, who was watching him with eyes that held intelligence far beyond her years. Emma, are you okay? Daddy, I understand what they're doing now. The treatments, the tests, they've been changing how my brain works. I can see patterns I couldn't see before, solve problems that used to be impossible. But they want to do something permanent, and they won't let me choose. The fact that Emma understood the situation with such clarity confirmed Roman Baird's claims about cognitive enhancement. But it also meant his 8-year-old daughter had been trapped in a nightmare of enforced intellectual evolution without consent. The permanent procedure requires your approval as her father, Roman Baird explained. We've learned that parental stress during the final protocol can cause complications. Your cooperation ensures Emma's survival. And if I refuse, then Emma returns to her baseline intelligence over the next few months, probably with permanent cognitive damage from the withdrawal. The other children's parents all chose to cooperate. Max looked at the unconscious kids again, understanding dawning. These aren't test subjects anymore. They're insurance. You've turned parents into accomplices by making them choose between their children's death and their children's enslavement. Roman Baird nodded approvingly. You're every bit as intelligent as your file suggested. Yes, that's exactly right. And now you face the same choice. Sign the consent forms. Emma becomes the most gifted human who's ever lived, and you join our organization as a voluntary partner. Refuse, and Emma suffers brain damage that leaves her worse than when we started. Max studied the room's layout one more time, counted the opposition, calculated angles and distances. 7 children's lives hung in the balance, plus whatever other victims Roman Baird had scattered across his network. I need to see the consent forms, Max said. As Roman Baird reached for a tablet, Max made his choice. Not the choice between Emma's enhancement or brain damage, but the choice every soldier made when facing impossible odds. Sometimes you couldn't win by following the enemy's rules. Grace, he said calmly, remember what I taught Emma about brave soldiers. Grace's eyes widened as she understood. Emma, brilliant beyond her years thanks to Roman Baird's own enhancements, immediately began working at her restraints with the systematic precision Max had taught her for emergency situations. And Max Davenport, who'd spent 15 years learning how to destroy enemies who threatened innocence, began the most important battle of his life. The predators were about to learn why wolves traveled in packs, and why threatening their young was a fatal mistake. Chapter 5. The Price of Monsters. The first rule of close-quarters combat, when outnumbered, turn the environment into an ally. Max's hand found the emergency fire alarm as he spoke to Grace, and the piercing sound that filled the room created exactly the chaos he needed. Emma, her enhanced cognitive abilities allowing her to process the situation with frightening clarity, had already freed herself from the medical restraints with techniques Max had taught her during their father-daughter escape artist games. As the alarm blared, she moved to help the other children while the adults' attention focused on Max. Roman Baird's mercenaries were professional, but they'd made the classic mistake of positioning themselves for intimidation rather than tactical advantage. Max's first move sent the nearest operative stumbling backward into expensive medical equipment, while his second disabled the room's main lighting. In the strobing red of emergency lighting, Max fought with the controlled fury of a father protecting his child and 6 other innocents. 15 years of military training met desperation and righteous anger, creating something more dangerous than Roman Baird's hired soldiers had ever encountered. Sedate the children, Roman Baird shouted over the chaos. We can't lose the subjects. But Emma, working with intelligence that should have been impossible for her age, had managed to wake two of the other children and was helping them toward the room's secondary exit. Grace, shaking off her paralysis, grabbed medical equipment to use as weapons against anyone who approached the children. Max disabled the second mercenary with moves that would have impressed his old hand-to-hand combat instructors, then found himself facing Roman Baird himself, who'd drawn a pistol with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to violence. Enough! Roman Baird's voice cut through the noise. Mr. Davenport, step back or I'll shoot one of the children. Max froze, but Emma's voice carried across the room with eerie calm. Daddy, he won't shoot us. We're too valuable to his research. His whole operation depends on keeping us alive. Roman Baird's expression shifted from confident control to disturbed uncertainty. Emma's enhancement had given her not just higher intelligence, but the ability to analyze human behavior with sophisticated understanding. She's right, Max realized. You can't hurt them without destroying years of research and millions of dollars in investment. But you know what? I can hurt you. Max's next move was decisive. Rather than engaging Roman Baird directly, he targeted the room's medical equipment, destroying monitors, computers, and research apparatus with systematic efficiency. Each piece of shattered technology represented data loss, financial damage, and operational disruption. Stop! You're destroying irreplaceable research data. Roman Baird's desperation was finally showing through his clinical facade. Good. Max's voice was ice. Emma, how many other children are there in this building? Scanning the facility blueprints I memorized, combined with audio patterns and electromagnetic signatures for medical equipment, I calculate 12 additional subjects in the lower levels. Emma replied with the analytical precision of a computer. Max stared at his daughter, whose cognitive enhancement allowed her to process and synthesize information at superhuman levels. Roman Baird hadn't just been experimenting on children. He'd been creating living weapons disguised as medical research. Grace, get all the conscious children out through the east exit. Emma will guide you. Max's tactical mind was working. Mr. Davenport, you don't understand the complexity of this operation, Roman Baird said, trying to regain control of the situation. These children represent breakthrough developments in human cognitive evolution. We're on the verge of eliminating learning disabilities, curing autism, enhancing intelligence across the entire spectrum of human potential. Would you destroy that to satisfy your primitive paternal instincts? Max paused in his destruction to look directly at Roman Baird. You've been torturing children and calling it medicine. You've been creating cognitive weapons and calling it therapy. You've destroyed families and called it research. So yes, I'm going to destroy every trace of this operation, and then I'm going to make sure you spend the rest of your life in a federal prison where other inmates will learn what you did to children. The enhancement process is irreversible at this stage. Roman Baird played his final card. Emma and the other advanced subjects will suffer permanent brain damage without continued treatment. You're condemning your own daughter to cognitive destruction. Emma's voice cut through the standoff. Daddy, he's lying. My enhanced processing allows me to understand the neurochemical changes they've induced. The effects will fade gradually over several months, but my baseline intelligence will return to normal levels without permanent damage. He's using fear to maintain control. Max felt a mixture of relief and horror. Relief that Emma would recover, but horror that his 8-year-old daughter now possessed the analytical capabilities to understand her own neurochemistry. In that case, Max said, turning back to Roman Baird, you just lost your leverage. The remaining fight was brief and decisive. Roman Baird's mercenaries were professionals, but they were also employees. When it became clear that their employer's operation was collapsing and their primary assets, the children, were escaping, their motivation shifted from aggression to self-preservation. Within 15 minutes, Max had cleared the building's upper levels and located the 12 additional children Roman Baird had mentioned. Most were unconscious, but alive. The younger ones appeared to have been subjected to earlier, less refined versions of the cognitive enhancement process. As sirens approached, Max's earlier call to Nathaniel Floyd had included precise timing for official intervention. Roman Baird made one last desperate attempt to salvage his operation. "You have no idea what you've destroyed," he said as Max zip-tied his hand with restraint from his tactical kit. Emma's intelligence could have revolutionized human civilization. The other children represented the next step in human evolution. "We were creating superhumans, and you've condemned humanity to remain limited by biology." Max looked at the unconscious children, then at Emma, who was helping Grace coordinate medical attention for the other victims. His daughter's enhanced intelligence was frightening in its scope, but her fundamental humanity remained intact. She was using her temporary abilities to help other children, not to exploit them. "Roman," Max said quietly, "the problem with your vision of superhumans was that you forgot the most important human quality, the choice to be good. You created enhanced intelligence without enhanced wisdom, increased capability without increased empathy. You weren't creating the next step in human evolution. You were creating monsters with high IQs." As federal agents flooded the building and EMTs began treating the rescued children, Max held Emma close and felt her enhanced cognitive abilities already beginning to fade. Her questions became simpler, her analytical observations less sophisticated. But what remained constant was her essential nature. A little girl who'd survived a nightmare and used her temporary gifts to help other children escape the same fate. Roman Baird and his network of child experimenters would face federal charges for human trafficking, illegal medical experimentation, kidnapping, and a dozen other crimes that would ensure they never harmed another child. The predators had fallen, but Max knew the real victory was simpler. Emma would grow up normal, healthy, and free to develop her natural gifts without forced enhancement or exploitation. Sometimes, the most important battles weren't won through superior firepower or tactical advantage. They were won by ordinary parents who refused to let monsters disguise evil as medicine. Chapter 6: Ghosts in the Machine. 3 weeks after the medical facility raid, Max thought they'd won. Roman Baird and his immediate associates were in federal custody. The enhanced children were receiving proper medical care as the cognitive modifications gradually faded, and Emma seemed to be adjusting well to returning to normal 8-year-old capabilities. He should have known it wouldn't be that simple. The first indication came through his cybersecurity business monitoring systems. Automated alerts showed someone probing his company's network defenses with sophisticated techniques that went far beyond routine hacker attempts. The intrusion patterns were familiar, the same systematic approach used by the intelligence organizations he'd worked with during his military service. Max was analyzing the digital attack vectors when his phone rang. Nathaniel Floyd's voice was tense. "Max, we have a problem. Roman Baird is claiming he was a small-time operator working for a much larger organization. According to his testimony, your intervention disrupted a decades-long research program with connections to defense contractors, pharmaceutical companies, and international research consortiums. Let me guess, he's offering to cooperate in exchange for immunity. Worse, he's claiming the enhanced children were part of a government-sanctioned program, and that your interference has compromised national security research. There are people in Washington who want to examine Emma and the other children to understand what was done to them." Max's blood went cold. "They want to continue the experiments under official authorization. That's what I'm afraid of." Roman Baird wasn't just running illegal medical research. He was apparently developing cognitive enhancement techniques for military applications. Enhanced soldiers, intelligence analysts with superhuman information processing capabilities, strategic planners who could calculate outcomes faster than computers. The scope of the conspiracy was becoming clear. Roman Baird hadn't been a rogue researcher. He'd been a contractor developing enhancement techniques for a classified program. Emma and the other children weren't just victims of child abuse. They were test subject for creating enhanced military personnel. How long do we have? Unknown. But Max, there are already indications that someone is conducting surveillance on the affected families. Professional-grade monitoring that suggests this goes beyond civilian law enforcement. Max activated his home security systems and began pulling data from the neighborhood monitoring network he'd established around their house. The analysis revealed what Nathaniel Floyd had feared: multiple teams conducting coordinated surveillance, using techniques that indicated military intelligence backgrounds. When Grace arrived home from work, Max was waiting with packed bags. "We're leaving," he said simply. "Now." "What happened?" Max explained the situation while Grace's face went white. Emma, her intelligence back to normal levels but still sharp enough to understand danger, listened quietly from the stairs. "They want to study how the enhancement process affected my brain," Emma said with the matter-of-fact clarity children sometimes brought to terrible situations. "They think they can figure out how to make it work on soldiers." "That's right," Max confirmed. "And unlike Roman Baird, they have legal authority to take you away from us for national security research." Grace sank into a chair. "How do we fight the government?" "We don't fight them. We disappear." Max's military service had included training in deep cover operations and asset protection. More importantly, his cybersecurity business had given him access to identity verification systems, financial networks, and communication infrastructures. If they needed to vanish, he could make it happen. But first, he needed to understand exactly who they were hiding from. That evening, while Grace and Emma prepared for their departure, Max activated every intelligence-gathering resource at his disposal. The digital investigation revealed a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of defense, contracting, and federal research funding. Roman Baird's medical practice had been one node in a network spanning multiple countries, all working on cognitive enhancement research for military applications. The children he'd experimented on represented the most successful test subjects to date, and their recovery data was considered crucial for refining the enhancement process. Emma wasn't just a victim. She was a prototype whose brain had responded to the enhancement protocols better than any previous subject. The fact that she'd retained functionality during the enhancement phase, while other children had become catatonic, made her particularly valuable for understanding how to create enhanced soldiers who remained tactically effective. The people now hunting them weren't content to let Emma recover naturally. They wanted to study her brain structure, analyze her neurochemistry, and potentially subject her to additional testing to unlock the secrets of successful cognitive enhancement. Max's phone buzzed with an encrypted message. "Mr. Davenport, we need to talk. Come alone to the address below at midnight. Your family's safety depends on your cooperation." The message included location coordinates for an abandoned industrial complex on the city's outskirts, the kind of location favored for meetings that officially never happened. Max studied the message, recognizing the clinical efficiency of government intelligence communications. They weren't threatening him directly. They were offering negotiation, which meant they needed something from him beyond just access to Emma. At 11:30 p.m., Max arrived at the designated location with full tactical gear and recording equipment. Whatever these people wanted, he intended to document every word for potential future legal proceedings. The man waiting for him in the empty warehouse was exactly what Max expected. Mid-50s, expensive but unremarkable clothing, the kind of face that disappeared in crowds but commanded rooms when necessary. Intelligence community middle management with authorization to make deals that could destroy lives or save them. "Mr. Davenport, thank you for coming. My name is Colonel Justin Perry, Defense Intelligence Agency. I understand you have concerns about your daughter's situation." Max almost smiled at the understatement. "You could say that. Roman Baird's research was part of a classified program developing human enhancement techniques for military applications. Your daughter represents the most successful test subject we've encountered. We need to understand how the enhancement process affected her neurology, so you can replicate it on soldiers. So we can protect soldiers from enemy forces who might be developing similar capabilities." Colonel Perry's response was smooth, prepared. Emma's brain successfully integrated cognitive enhancements that left other subjects catatonic or brain damaged. Understanding why could help us develop countermeasures against enhanced enemy combatants. Max studied the colonel's micro-expressions, voice patterns, and body language with skills developed through years of interrogating hostile operatives. "You're lying. You don't want countermeasures. You want to create your own enhanced soldiers." Colonel Perry's professional mask slipped slightly. The program has multiple objectives. But Mr. Davenport, consider the alternative. If we don't develop these capabilities, and other nations do, American soldiers will face enhanced enemies with normal human limitations. Emma's data could save thousands of military lives by subjecting her to continued experimentation, by conducting non-invasive brain scans and cognitive assessments. We're not proposing to restart the enhancement protocols, simply to understand how they affected her neural development. Max considered the offer, analyzing it from multiple angles. Colonel Perry was offering a compromise that sounded reasonable, but probably concealed much more invasive intentions. The government rarely settled for non-invasive when valuable research was involved. What guarantees do I have that you'll stop with brain scans? You have my word as an officer. Your word backed up by what enforcement mechanism? Colonel Perry's smile was thin. Mr. Davenport, your former military intelligence. You understand how classified programs work. There are no external enforcement mechanisms when national security is involved. In other words, once they had Emma, they could do whatever they wanted without oversight or accountability. Max made his decision. Colonel Perry, thank you for your honesty. Now I'll be honest with you. My daughter was tortured by people claiming to conduct medical research. I will not allow her to be tortured by people claiming to conduct national security research. Find another way to develop your enhanced soldiers. Mr. Davenport, you're making a mistake. We have legal authority to what? Kidnap an 8-year-old American citizen for medical experimentation? Good luck explaining that to Congress when the story breaks. Max turned to leave, but Colonel Perry's next words stopped him cold. We know about the warehouse, Mr. Davenport. We know Roman Baird kept detailed research data on all his subjects. We know there were 17 other children in his program, and we know where their families live. Your cooperation could ensure they're left alone. Your resistance could result in all of them being brought in for evaluation. Max understood. Emma wasn't the only prize. She was leveraged to secure cooperation from other families whose children had been enhanced. If he refused, 18 families would face government intrusion instead of just his own. The predators had evolved, but they were still threatening children to control parents. Max smiled, and Colonel Perry took an involuntary step backward. Colonel, you just made a fatal tactical error. You told me that you're planning to go after other families, which means I can't protect Emma by running. I have to protect all the children by eliminating the threat. Mr. Davenport, you can't fight the United States government. I fought the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, and international arms dealers. Government bureaucrats running illegal human experimentation programs should be easier. Max left the warehouse knowing the war was far from over. Roman Baird had been a contractor. Colonel Perry represented the actual enemy. And this enemy had resources, legal authority, and no apparent moral limitations. But they'd made the same mistake Roman Baird had made. They'd threatened his child. The difference was that this time, Max wasn't just fighting to rescue one little girl. He was fighting to protect 18 children from a government conspiracy that viewed them as military assets rather than human beings. The predators had government backing now, but Max Davenport was about to remind them why wolves hunted in packs and why some battles couldn't be won through superior resources alone. Chapter 7. The Pack Hunts Back. Max returned home to find Grace and Emma ready to run. But his conversation with Colonel Perry had changed the tactical situation completely. Running would only delay the inevitable while putting 17 other families at risk. Change of plans, he announced. We're not disappearing. We're going to war. Max, you can't fight the government. I can't fight the legitimate government. But I can destroy a rogue intelligence operation that's conducting illegal human experimentation on American children. Max pulled up his laptop and began implementing a plan he'd been developing since the warehouse meeting. Grace, I need you to contact the other families. Tell them what's happening, what Colonel Perry is planning. We need to coordinate our response. What kind of response? The kind that ends this permanently. Emma, sitting at the kitchen table with unusual seriousness for an 8-year-old, looked up from her homework. Daddy, are you going to hurt the bad people? Max knelt beside her chair. I'm going to stop them from hurting other children. Sometimes that means making sure bad people can't do bad things anymore. Like you did with the fake doctor? Exactly like that, but bigger. Over the next 48 hours, Max orchestrated a response that combined his military training with his cybersecurity expertise and his growing network of angry parents whose children had been victimized by Roman Baird's program. The other families weren't all equipped to disappear or fight back, but they all had one thing in common. They were furious at being manipulated into endangering their children and terrified of continued government harassment. Andy Cantu arrived on the second day with 3 other veterans from their old unit, all of whom had transitioned to civilian careers but retained their military skills and brotherhood bonds. When Max explained the situation, their response was immediate and unanimous. "Nobody experiments on American kids," Tony Poole said simply. "What's the plan?" Max spread building schematics across his dining room table. Colonel Perry's operation is based in a classified facility outside the city. Official records show it as a defense contractor research lab, but my intelligence indicates it's where they're planning to conduct assessments on the enhanced children. Assault on a federal facility? Hal Burns raised an eyebrow. "That's life in prison if we're caught." "Only if we're caught," Max replied, "and only if they can prove we were there. But we're not going in for direct confrontation. We're going in for intelligence gathering and evidence collection." Max's plan was elegantly simple. Instead of attacking the facility, they would document everything happening inside it, then release that documentation to every major news organization, congressional oversight committee, and human rights organization simultaneously. "The program's strength is secrecy," Max explained. "They can operate without oversight as long as nobody knows what they're doing. But once their activities become public knowledge, political pressure will shut them down faster than any military action." "How do we get inside a classified facility?" Max smiled. "The same way I used to infiltrate terrorist compounds. We don't break in, we get invited in." The first phase involved Max's cybersecurity company receiving a contract to evaluate security vulnerabilities at the research facility. A contract arranged through defense contractor connections who owed Max favors from previous cybersecurity projects. The second phase involved equipping the facility evaluation team with recording equipment sophisticated enough to document everything they encountered while appearing to conduct routine security assessments. The third phase would be the coordinated media release that would expose Colonel Perry's program to public scrutiny and political accountability. But Max's plan had a fourth phase that he shared only with his military veterans: insurance against retaliation. "They'll try to bury the story, discredit the evidence, and probably come after us personally," Max told his assembled team. "So we're going to make sure they can't." The insurance phase involved gathering enough compromising information about Colonel Perry and his superiors to guarantee their silence. If they tried to retaliate against any of the families, Max would release evidence of defense contractor fraud, illegal human experimentation, and constitutional violations that would destroy careers and result in criminal prosecutions. "Mutually assured destruction," Andy Cantu observed. "You're going to blackmail the blackmailers." "I'm going to protect 18 families from government retaliation by making retaliation too expensive for the government to attempt." 3 days later, Max's security team entered the classified research facility for their contracted evaluation. Hidden cameras and audio recording devices documented everything they encountered: holding cells designed for children, medical equipment configured for cognitive testing, research protocols that explicitly discussed enhanced subject acquisition, and parental cooperation maintenance. Most damning of all, they recorded Colonel Perry discussing plans to expand the program internationally, using diplomatic immunity to conduct enhancement experiments in countries with fewer legal protections for children. But the evidence that sealed Colonel Perry's fate was his recorded conversation about terminating the Davenport problem permanently through methods that wouldn't be traceable to the program. Max had been right. They weren't just planning to experiment on Emma and the other children. They were planning to eliminate any parents who couldn't be controlled through intimidation. The media release was coordinated across 17 news organizations simultaneously, making suppression impossible. Within 6 hours, congressional oversight committees were demanding investigations, human rights organizations were filing federal lawsuits, and defense contractor executives were desperately trying to distance themselves from Colonel Perry's program. Colonel Perry's response was swift but predictable. A team of mercenaries attempted to raid Max's house that same evening, presumably to seize Emma and eliminate the family as threats to the program's security. They found Max waiting for them with Andy, Tony, and Hal, along with complete documentation of their identities, their connection to Colonel Perry, and audio recordings of their mission briefings. The mercenaries' employer had just provided final evidence of the program's willingness to use violence against American families to protect illegal research operations. By morning, Colonel Perry was under federal investigation for human trafficking, illegal medical experimentation, conspiracy to commit murder, and violation of constitutional protections against unreasonable government seizure. His entire program was shut down, his research files were seized by federal prosecutors, and his defense contractor connections were severing all ties to avoid being implicated in the scandal. The predators who'd threatened children while hiding behind government authority discovered that some parents possessed the skills and determination to destroy enemies regardless of their official backing. Emma and the 17 other enhanced children would be left alone to recover naturally from their cognitive modifications, under medical supervision, but without government interference. Max's network of angry parents had become a pack of wolves capable of hunting much larger prey than any individual predator. Colonel Perry and his associates learned what Roman Baird had learned before them. Threatening children was a fatal mistake when those children's parents possessed the skills and motivation to fight back without limitation. The war was over, but Max kept his insurance files, just in case any other government programs decided that American children made convenient test subjects. Some battles ended with negotiated truces. This one ended with absolute victory and the complete destruction of the enemy's capability to threaten innocence. Chapter 8. Scorched Earth Protocol. Colonel Perry's arrest should have ended the threat, but Max's intelligence background had taught him that cutting off one head of a hydra often revealed two more. His suspicions proved correct when Emma's school counselor, Carol Cook, requested an urgent meeting about concerns regarding Emma's educational needs. Max arrived at Jefferson Elementary prepared for a routine parent-teacher conference and instead found himself facing a woman whose questions revealed detailed knowledge of Emma's cognitive enhancement history. Emma's recent standardized test scores show some unusual patterns, Carol Cook said, spreading papers across her desk. Specifically, decline rates that suggest previous artificial enhancement followed by systematic neural recovery. We'd like to discuss supplemental educational programs that might help her maintain her advanced capabilities. Every instinct Max had developed through 15 years of intelligence work screamed danger. Carol Cook wasn't a school counselor concerned about Emma's education. She was a handler trying to gain access to a valuable research subject. How exactly did you become aware of Emma's previous artificial enhancement? Max asked quietly. Carol Cook's professional smile faltered slightly. I'm not sure what you mean. I'm simply concerned about helping gifted children reach their potential. Max leaned forward. Carol, I'm going to ask you once more, and I want you to think very carefully about your answer. Who sent you to evaluate my daughter? The facade crumbled completely. Mr. Davenport, you've disrupted several years of crucial research. Emma represents unique developmental data that could benefit thousands of children with learning disabilities and cognitive impairments. Surely you understand the greater good served by continuing her evaluation. What I understand is that another government program is trying to get access to my daughter despite the explicit congressional prohibition against further research on the enhanced children. Carol Cook opened her desk drawer, and Max tensed, expecting a weapon. Instead, she produced an official-looking document. This is a court order requiring Emma's participation in educational assessment protocols. It's been authorized at the federal level as an exception to the congressional prohibition. Max examined the paperwork. Legitimate federal court seal, proper signatures, legal language that mandated Emma's participation in cognitive assessment for national educational policy development. Someone with serious political connections had found a loophole in the congressional prohibition. When does this assessment begin? Tomorrow, Emma will be transported to a specialized educational facility for 3 days of comprehensive testing. Max stood up slowly. Carol, you just made the same mistake that Roman Baird and Colonel Perry made. You've threatened my daughter while assuming I wouldn't be capable of serious retaliation. Mr. Davenport, this is a federal court order. Resisting will result in criminal charges. Will it? Max's smile was predatory. Because I think you're about to discover that this particular court order was obtained through fraud, perjury, and misrepresentation of the children's legal status. And when that's exposed, everyone involved in obtaining it will face federal prosecution for conspiracy and civil rights violations. Max left Jefferson Elementary and immediately activated what he privately called his scorched earth protocol, the complete destruction of enemy capability through systematic exposure of their entire network. The investigation that followed revealed a conspiracy that reached into federal courts, defense contractors, pharmaceutical companies, and international research consortiums. The enhanced children weren't just valuable to American military research. They were being sought by foreign intelligence services, medical research corporations, and private military contractors. Carol Cook wasn't a school counselor. She was a talent acquisition specialist for a private research company that had contracts with multiple governments. The educational assessment was intended to provide research access to Emma while maintaining legal cover through court orders. But the court orders themselves had been obtained by misrepresenting the children's legal status, lying about the nature of the proposed research, and failing to disclose the international commercial interests involved. Max's response was comprehensive and devastating. Working with his network of veteran allies and affected parents, he exposed not just Carol Cook's operation, but the entire web of interconnected organizations trying to continue research on the enhanced children. The media campaign that followed destroyed careers, triggered congressional investigations, resulted in federal prosecutions, and led to new legislation explicitly protecting children who had been subjected to cognitive enhancement experiments. But Max's most effective weapon wasn't public exposure. It was personal retaliation against the individuals who had threatened his family. Carol Cook found her entire professional life systematically dismantled. Her credentials were revoked for ethics violations. Her research contracts were canceled, and evidence of her participation in illegal human experimentation was provided to federal prosecutors. The private research company that employed her was bankrupted through lawsuits from the affected families and congressional investigations that exposed massive fraud. The federal judge who had signed the fraudulent court orders faced impeachment proceedings when Max's evidence revealed he'd been accepting payments from defense contractors while issuing orders that benefited their research programs. The defense contractors, pharmaceutical companies, and private military organizations involved in seeking access to the enhanced children found themselves facing federal investigations, congressional oversight, and criminal prosecutions that would take years to resolve. Max's scorched earth protocol didn't just stop the immediate threat to Emma. It destroyed the entire network's capability to threaten any of the enhanced children ever again. 6 months later, Emma was attending a normal school, receiving age-appropriate education, and showing no lasting effects from her cognitive enhancement experience beyond occasionally impressive problem-solving skills that could be attributed to natural intelligence rather than artificial modification. The other 17 children were similarly recovering, protected by legislation that Max had helped write and congressional oversight that he had helped establish. Roman Baird died in federal prison, apparently from complications related to an assault by other inmates who had learned about his crimes against children. Colonel Perry received a life sentence for human trafficking and conspiracy to commit murder, with his military honors stripped and his pension revoked. Carol Cook was serving 15 years in federal prison for conspiracy, fraud, and child endangerment. Max's files contained enough evidence to destroy the careers and freedom of dozens of other individuals who had participated in various aspects of the enhancement program, ensuring that none of them would ever again be in positions to threaten children. The predators who had viewed Emma and her friends as research assets learned that some parents possess the capability to wage total war against enemies regardless of their resources, connections, or official authority. Emma would grow up normal, safe, and protected by a father whose enemies had discovered too late that threatening his family was a fatal mistake with consequences that extended far beyond what any of them had imagined possible. The war was over, and Max Davenport had won it so completely that the enemy no longer existed in any meaningful form. Chapter 9. The Price of Victory. 1 year later, Max stood in his backyard watching Emma play with her friends, their laughter carrying across the evening air as they chased fireflies in the gathering dusk. She was 9 now, completely recovered from the cognitive enhancements, and showing no interest in quantum physics or complex pattern recognition beyond what any bright child might display. Grace appeared beside him, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Penny for your thoughts?" "Just grateful," Max replied, accepting the coffee and wrapping his arm around his wife's shoulders. "A year ago, I wasn't sure we'd ever have normal family moments again. The previous 12 months had been a mixture of healing and cleanup." Emma had received counseling to help process her experience, though her natural resilience and the fact that her enhanced state had actually helped her understand and cope with the situation meant she'd adjusted better than most of the other children. Grace had undergone therapy as well, working through the guilt and manipulation she'd experienced. Max's anger at her initial participation in Roman Baird's program had given way to understanding as he'd learned more about the sophisticated psychological techniques used to compromise parents. The 17 other families had formed a support network, helping each other navigate the recovery process and the ongoing legal proceedings. Most of the children were doing well, though a few still struggled with nightmares and trust issues. Max's phone buzzed with a text from Nathaniel Floyd. Final conviction came through today. Senator Mitchell, 20 years federal for conspiracy and accepting bribes related to the enhancement program. That's the last of them. Senator Oliver Mitchell had been the highest-ranking government official implicated in the conspiracy to continue research on enhanced children. His conviction marked the end of the prosecutions that had grown out of Max's investigation. The final tally was impressive. 47 individuals convicted on various charges ranging from fraud to human trafficking, 6 defense contractors bankrupted or dissolved, 3 pharmaceutical companies under permanent federal oversight, and new congressional legislation protecting children from unauthorized medical research. Emma ran over to them, grass stains on her knees and fireflies trapped in a mason jar. "Daddy, look, I caught 7. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. What are you going to do with them?" "Let them go, of course. They're too pretty to keep trapped." Max smiled at the unconscious wisdom in her words. Freedom was indeed too precious to take from creatures that deserve to choose their own path. "Mr. Davenport?" A voice called from their front yard. Max tensed automatically. Unexpected visitors still triggered his security instincts, but relaxed when he saw Andy Kanda walking toward them with a young woman in military uniform. "Max, I'd like you to meet Lieutenant Shelby Farley, Army Intelligence. She has something interesting to tell you." Lieutenant Farley extended her hand professionally. "Mr. Davenport, I want to thank you personally. Your investigation into the enhancement program exposed a security breach that had been compromising military intelligence operations for 3 years." "How so?" Several of the defense contractors involved in Roman Baird's program were also working on classified military projects. When you exposed their illegal research activities, it revealed that foreign intelligence services had been using the enhancement research as cover for industrial espionage. Your actions helped us identify and close security vulnerabilities that could have compromised national defense. Max nodded, unsurprised. Criminal conspiracies rarely operated in isolation. They tended to create vulnerabilities that other bad actors could exploit. "There's something else," Lieutenant Farley continued. "The Army is developing new protocols for protecting military families from similar situations. Would you be willing to consult on the program? Your experience and methods could help other service members deal with threats that target their children." Max looked at Grace, then at Emma, who was carefully releasing her fireflies one by one. "I'll consider it, but any program I'm involved with will prioritize protecting families over protecting institutional interests." "Understood." The Army learned from this situation that threats to military families can become threats to national security. We want to prevent future Roman Bairds, not create them. After Lieutenant Farley left, Max walked through his house, checking the security systems that had become second nature to maintain. The enhanced monitoring, tactical equipment, and intelligence gathering capabilities he developed during the crisis remained active, not because he expected new threats, but because preparedness had kept his family safe. Emma's bedroom door was cracked open, and he could hear her talking to Grace about her school project on butterflies. Normal childhood concerns about normal childhood interests the way it should be. Grace found him later in his office, reviewing the security reports that still arrived daily from his various monitoring systems. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "The way you handled everything, I mean. The lives you destroyed, the careers you ended, the people who are in prison because of your investigation." Max considered the question seriously. Roman Baird was dead. Colonel Perry would spend his life in prison. Carol Cook would be released sometime in the 2030s if she served her full sentence, and dozens of other individuals had lost everything because of their involvement in experimenting on children. "No," he said finally. "They chose to prey on children for money, power, or research advancement. They turned kids into test subjects and parents into accomplices. Every consequence they faced was earned through their own actions. Even Roman Baird's death? Especially that. Child predators don't last long in prison, and everyone knew exactly what he'd done to earn a sentence. I didn't kill him, but I'm not going to mourn someone who tortured children for profit." Grace nodded slowly. "I just sometimes wonder if there was a less absolute solution." Grace, they had a network spanning multiple countries, government connections at the federal level, and legal authority to take children from their families for research purposes. Anything less than complete destruction of their capability would have left Emma and the other kids vulnerable to future attempts. Max pulled up a file on his computer showing recent intelligence about international human trafficking operations. Besides, we weren't their only targets. The investigation exposed connections to child trafficking networks in 6 countries. The people we brought down were involved in horrors that went far beyond cognitive enhancement research. Emma's voice carried down the hallway as she sang herself to sleep, a simple children's song about birds flying free. "That's why I don't regret anything," Max said quietly. "Because Emma gets to be a normal little girl who sings herself to sleep instead of a research subject trapped in a government facility." 6 months later, Max received a final piece of closure, a letter from one of the other enhanced children, now 11 years old and doing well in school. "Dear Mr. Davenport," the letter read, "My mom told me you were the one who stopped the bad doctors from hurting us. I wanted you to know that I'm okay now. I don't remember being super smart like my parents said, but I do remember being scared. Thank you for making the scary people go away. I hope Emma is happy too." The letter was signed by 12-year-old Tommy Andrews, one of the children who had been unconscious in Roman Baird's facility during the rescue. Max filed the letter with similar notes he'd received from other families, physical reminders that his Scorched Earth campaign had been about more than revenge. It had been about protecting innocents from predators who viewed children as resources to be exploited. Emma was now in 4th grade, earning solid B's and A's through normal effort and natural intelligence. She played soccer, took piano lessons, and had normal 9-year-old concerns about friend drama and homework. Most importantly, she trusted doctors again, felt safe in schools, and showed no lasting psychological damage from her experience as an enhanced research subject. Max had kept his promise to make sure the monsters could never hurt children again, and he'd done it so thoroughly that Emma would grow up in a world where the particular evil that had threatened her no longer existed. The predators were gone, the children were safe, and Max Davenport could finally sleep peacefully knowing that his family's greatest threat had been eliminated completely and permanently. Victory had required absolute commitment to the destruction of enemies who threatened innocence. But the price had been worth paying to ensure that Emma could grow up free, normal, and protected from those who would exploit her exceptional nature. The war was over, and the wolves had won so decisively that the sheep could graze in peace, knowing their protectors had eliminated the predators entirely rather than simply driving them away to threaten other families. In the end, that was the only victory that mattered. Complete, permanent and absolute protection for those too innocent to protect themselves from monsters disguised as healers, researchers, and public servants. Emma's laughter echoed through the house as she played with friends, safe in the knowledge that her father had faced down every threat and emerged victorious, ensuring that her childhood could be everything it was meant to be: normal, happy, and free from the shadows of those who would have stolen her humanity in the name of advancing their own ambitions. The nightmares were over, and only dreams remained. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Deep. Joel Byers had spent 15 years perfecting the art of silence. Not just the operational silence required aboard the USS Leviathan, where even a dropped wrench could mean the difference between invisibility and detection, but the deeper silence of a man who had learned that words were weapons best kept sheathed until the moment demanded their edge. At 38, Joel commanded respect through presence rather than volume. His crew called him Ice behind his back, not out of disrespect, but recognition of his unnerving calm under pressure. During the Iranian crisis 2 years prior, when hostile submarines had stalked them through the Strait of Hormuz, Joel had methodically outmaneuvered 3 enemy vessels while his captain slept, never once raising his voice above a whisper. The Leviathan was home in ways his house in Virginia Beach had never been. Here, 200 feet beneath the Pacific surface, every system had a purpose, every man had a role, and betrayal was impossible. The ocean itself would punish disloyalty with swift, merciless death. Joel's personal quarters were Spartan. A narrow bunk, a desk barely large enough for his charts, and a single photograph. The picture showed his wife Candy and their 16-year-old daughter Miranda at last year's Navy Christmas party. Candy's smile seemed forced even then, her auburn hair perfectly styled, green eyes focused somewhere beyond the camera. Miranda, however, beamed with genuine pride, wearing Joel's old Navy pin on her dress. Daddy's little sailor. He'd called her since she was 5. Miranda was the one person who could crack Joel's legendary composure, the only soul he'd ever loved without reservation or strategy. His marriage to Candy had been different, calculated from the start. They'd met during shore leave in San Diego 7 years ago. She was beautiful, charming, and ambitious, working as a real estate agent with dreams of bigger things. Joel recognized her type. Someone who viewed marriage as advancement, not partnership. But she was also magnetic, the kind of woman who turned heads and sparked envy. For a man who spent months underwater, having such a wife waiting ashore felt like a trophy earned. Their courtship was brief, professional almost. Candy admired his rank and potential for promotion. Joel appreciated her social skills and the way she managed their household during his long deployments. Love, if it existed, was convenient rather than consuming. Miranda changed everything. From a moment Joel held his newborn daughter, he understood what people meant when they spoke of unconditional love. She became his anchor to the surface world, the reason he counted days until shore leave, the face that appeared in his mind during the longest, darkest patrols. Now, 3 weeks into their current deployment, Joel was reviewing sonar patterns when Communications Officer Preston Nolan approached with unusual hesitation. "Sir," Preston's voice carried an odd tension. "Priority communication for you. Personal emergency." Joel's blood temperature dropped 2 degrees. His physical response to potential crisis developed through years of submarine service. He followed Preston to the communications bay, noting how the younger officer avoided eye contact. The encrypted line crackled as Joel accepted the handset. "This is Lieutenant Commander Byers." "Joel." Candy's voice, but wrong somehow. Higher pitched, almost breathless. "Thank God. You need to know, Miranda's in the hospital. Critical condition." The words hit like depth charges, distant but devastating. "What happened?" "Accident at home." Head trauma. Joel, it's bad. Really bad. The doctors. Her voice broke, but underneath the sobbing, Joel detected something his trained ear couldn't quite identify. Captain Stuart Barr materialized beside him, having monitored the emergency channel. Son, we're in contested waters. Can't surface for 3 days minimum. I understand, sir. Joel's voice remained steady even as his world tilted. Candy, I need details. How did it happen? The line carried ambient hospital sounds, monitors beeping, distant conversations. Then Candy's voice again, but not directed at the phone. Thank God, his coward dad isn't here to complicate things. Joel's grip on the handset tightened. The words were clearly audible, meant for someone else in the room. Before he could respond, a new voice joined the call. Sir, this is Dr. Elias Davidson. Your daughter was found unconscious with severe head trauma. We're monitoring for brain swelling, but the next 48 hours are critical. Found? Where's she found? Background noise shifted, and Joel heard a third voice, official professional. The neighbor saw someone leaving your house around the time we estimate the incident occurred. The line went dead. Joel stood motionless for 30 seconds, processing data like the submarine's tactical computer. Candy's strange tone, her comment about him being a coward dad, the mention of someone leaving the house, the timing. Preston watched nervously as Joel handed back the handset. Sir? Orders. Maintain current heading and depth. Joel's voice carried the same calm authority he used during combat drills. Continue mission parameters. But inside, beneath the professional mask, something fundamental had shifted. Joel Byers had spent 15 years learning that the ocean punished deception and disloyalty without mercy or forgiveness. Now, it seemed, the surface world required similar lessons. As he returned to his quarters, Joel began calculating. Not torpedo trajectories or sonar triangulations, but something far more personal and infinitely more dangerous. If his family was in crisis, he would respond with the same methodical precision he brought to underwater warfare. The photograph on his desk showed Miranda's trusting smile. Whatever had happened to his daughter, whoever was responsible, they had made a critical error in judgment. They had threatened Joel Byers' anchor to the world above. Chapter 2. Surface Tension. 72 hours passed like depth charges in slow motion. Joel maintained his duties with mechanical precision, but every spare moment was spent in his quarters, staring at Miranda's photograph and replaying that phone call. The more he analyzed Candy's words and tone, the more discrepancies emerged. Preston Nolan entered without knocking, a privilege Joel had granted only to the communications officer during emergencies. Sir, another call. Your wife again. Joel followed him back to communications, noting how the crew parted slightly as he passed. Word had spread about Miranda's condition, and submarine crews were like small towns. Everyone knew everyone's business. Candy. Joel's voice remained controlled. Joel, thank God. Miranda's stable, but still unconscious. The doctors say. Her voice carried the same strange breathiness as before. Look, there's something else. Stanley Pearson from your old unit called. Said he wanted to help during this difficult time. Joel's blood turned arctic. Stanley Pearson, a man he'd served with 5 years ago, before Joel's promotion and transfer. Pearson had been cashiered from the Navy for conduct unbecoming, specifically for attempting to seduce officers' wives during deployments. The fact that Candy even knew Stanley's name sent alarm signals through Joel's tactical mind. I don't remember giving you Stanley's contact information. He found me through social media. Wanted to offer support. Another pause, then Candy's voice again, not directed at the phone. Don't worry, he's still underwater for 2 more days. This time, Joel was certain. Candy thought the line was muted or disconnected. She was speaking to someone else, someone she was reassuring about his location and availability. Candy, who's with you? What? Oh, just hospital staff. Joel, I need to go. The doctor wants to run more tests. Wait, I want to speak with Dr. Davidson again. He's not available. I'll call tomorrow. The line went dead again, but this time Joel was ready. He'd been recording the conversation on his personal device, a habit developed during intelligence briefings. Preston lingered nearby, clearly wanting to offer comfort, but uncertain how to approach his notoriously self-contained superior officer. "Preston, I need a favor. Personal, not operational." "Of course, sir. Contact your brother, the one who works Virginia Beach PD. I need information about an incident report filed 3 days ago. My address." Discreetly, Preston nodded, understanding the gravity. Joel's brother Marcus was a detective with connections throughout the Virginia Beach law enforcement community. 6 hours later, Preston returned with a printout that made Joel's suspicions crystallize into cold certainty. The incident report was sparse but revealing. Miranda Byers, age 16, found unconscious in her bedroom by her mother. Head trauma consistent with a fall downstairs. Mother, Candace Byers, stated she'd been at work during the incident. No witnesses, no signs of forced entry. But the neighbor's statement, buried in the supplemental reports, told a different story. Mrs. Jennifer Ball, age 67, reported seeing a man leave the Byers residence approximately 30 minutes before the ambulance arrived. Description: Caucasian male, approximately 40 years old, medium build, driving a blue pickup truck. Joel cross-referenced the description with his mental files on Stanley Pearson. The age, build, and vehicle type matched perfectly. "Sir," Preston waited for orders. "Send a message to your brother. I need everything he can find on Stanley Pearson. Current address, vehicle registration, employment history. Everything. Sir, we're still 2 days from port. I know exactly how long we have." Joel's voice carried a new edge, something Preston had never heard before. "And I need that time to plan." Alone in his quarters, Joel spread his charts across the desk. Not navigational charts, but floor plans of his house that he drew from memory. He marked sight lines, entry points, and the exact location where Miranda would have been found. The stairs from Miranda's second-floor bedroom to the main level had a landing halfway down. If someone had pushed her, the trajectory would be wrong for the injuries described. But if someone had struck her in her room and then arranged her body at the base of the stairs, Joel's analytical mind processed the scenario with the same clinical detachment he used for combat assessments. Miranda had discovered something, either Candy and Stanley in a compromising position or evidence of their relationship. Stanley had panicked, struck her harder than intended, and they'd staged the scene to look like an accident. The comment about him being a coward dad now made perfect sense. Candy was reassuring Stanley that Joel wouldn't complicate their cover story because he was trapped underwater, unable to investigate or interfere. They had made 2 critical errors. First, they'd underestimated Joel's ability to gather intelligence from beneath the ocean. Second, they'd hurt Miranda. Joel opened his laptop and began typing. Not official Navy communications, but personal messages to contacts accumulated over 15 years of military service. Men who owed him favors. Men who shared his code about family and loyalty. Men who understood that some debts could only be paid in blood. By the time the Leviathan surfaced in San Diego, Joel would have assets in place. Surveillance on Candy and Stanley. Financial records. Employment histories. Personal weaknesses and vulnerabilities. The ocean had taught Joel patience, precision, and the value of overwhelming force applied at exactly the right moment. In 48 hours, Stanley Pearson and Candace Byers would discover that betraying Joel's daughter was the last mistake they would ever make. As he worked, Joel felt the familiar calm descend, the same state of focused clarity that had made him legendary among submarine crews. This was just another tactical problem requiring surgical solutions. Miranda's photograph watched from the desk as her father planned war. Chapter 3: Depth Analysis. The Leviathan broke surface under a gray San Diego dawn, water cascading from her hull like tears from a steel whale. Joel stood on the conning tower, breathing his first surface air in 3 weeks, tasting salt and freedom and the metallic edge of impending violence. His encrypted phone buzzed with messages accumulated during their ascent. 3 were from Candy, each more frantic than the last. 2 were from Marcus Nolan, Preston's detective brother. The final message came from a number Joel recognized, Garrett McDonald, his former Master Chief, now running private security in Virginia Beach. Garrett's message was characteristically brief, Package delivered. Sugar confirmed. All hands ready. Sugar. Mint surveillance was in place. Joel's network was operational. Preston approached with final communication logs. Sir, your brother-in-law called the boat directly. Says Miranda woke up yesterday, but isn't speaking yet. Doctors are cautiously optimistic. Relief flooded through Joel's chest, the first genuine emotion he'd allowed himself in 3 days. Miranda was alive, conscious, probably going to recover fully. But the fact that she wasn't speaking suggested trauma beyond physical injury. She'd seen something, remembered something. Joel's phone rang. Candy, calling right on schedule. Joel, thank God you're back on surface. When will you be home? Flying out tonight. How's Miranda? Better. She's awake now, and the doctors think she'll make a full recovery. It's such a relief. Candy's voice carried genuine emotion for the first time since this began. Maternal instinct, perhaps, or fear that her daughter might remember inconvenient details. I want to speak with her. She's still pretty out of it. Maybe when you get home. Candy. Joel's voice dropped to the register his crew knew meant absolute authority. Put my daughter on the phone. Now. A pause, then rustling sounds. Miranda's voice came through, weak but unmistakably hers. Daddy. The single word nearly shattered Joel's composure. Hey, little sailor. How are you feeling? Tired. My head hurts. A pause. Daddy, something happened. I know, sweetheart. We'll talk when I get home. Okay? Just rest. Mom says I fell down the stairs, but Miranda's voice faded as the phone was clearly taken away. She's exhausted, Candy said back on the line. The medication makes her confused. Doctor says memory issues are normal with head trauma. But Joel had heard what he needed. Miranda's tone carried the same uncertainty as his sonar operators when they detected something that didn't match their instruments. She knew the official story was wrong. I'll be home tomorrow morning, Joel said. Don't let anyone else visit until I arrive. Of course. Joel, I'm so sorry this happened while you were away. I feel terrible that I wasn't home to prevent it. Joel disconnected without responding. Candy's performance was improving, but she was still an amateur playing against a professional. The flight to Norfolk Naval Base gave Joel 8 hours to review the intelligence Garrett had compiled. Stanley Pearson, 42, dishonorably discharged from the Navy, currently unemployed, but living beyond his apparent means in a rented house 3 miles from Joel's residence. Vehicle registration confirmed. Blue Chevrolet pickup, license plate matching the neighbor's partial description. More interesting was the timeline Garrett had reconstructed through security cameras and cell phone towers. Stanley's phone had pinged towers near Joel's house 17 times in the past month, always during Joel's deployment. The pattern suggested regular visits, not chance encounters. But the most damning evidence was photographic. Garrett's surveillance team had captured images of Stanley leaving Joel's house the morning of Miranda's accident, approximately 25 minutes before Candy called 911. His expression was clearly visible: panic, guilt, and fear. Joel studied the photograph as his plane descended toward Norfolk. Stanley Pearson looked exactly like what he was, a man who had just made a catastrophic mistake and was desperately hoping to escape consequences. He was about to learn that Joel Byers never left consequences to chance. Garrett met Joel at the airport, a mountain of a man with scarred hands and eyes that had seen too much combat to retain illusions about human nature. Situation's worse than we thought, Garrett said without preamble as they walked to his car. Your wife's been careful, but not careful enough. Financial records show she's been paying Stanley's rent for 3 months. Credit card receipts put them together at hotels during your deployments. How long? Best guess. 6 months minimum. Maybe longer. Joel absorbed this information like tactical data. The betrayal was extensive, well-established, and apparently confident enough that they'd grown careless. That overconfidence would be their downfall. What's your assessment of Miranda's situation? Garrett's expression darkened. She walked in on them. Had a half. Stanley panicked, hit her harder than he intended. Then they staged the fall. If your daughter hadn't survived, but she did. Joel's voice carried the finality of a torpedo lock. And she's going to remember everything. As they drove toward Virginia Beach, Joel outlined his plan. It was comprehensive, merciless, and completely legal, at least on the surface. Joel had learned from the best submarine commanders that the most effective attacks were the ones the enemy never saw coming. By the time Candy and Stanley realized they were under assault, it would be far too late to mount any defense. Joel Byers was coming home, and he was bringing the full weight of 15 years of military training, tactical expertise, and carefully cultivated ruthlessness. The war was about to begin. Chapter 4. Home Invasion. Joel's house looked exactly as he'd left it 3 weeks ago. Colonial Revival architecture, manicured lawn, the kind of suburban perfection that concealed more secrets than it revealed. But now he saw it through tactical eyes. Sight lines, entry points, defensive positions. His home had become a battlefield. Candy's BMW sat in the driveway beside a vehicle Joel didn't recognize. A silver Honda with temporary tags. Rental car, probably for Stanley, suggesting they were being more careful about his truck being spotted. Joel parked across the street and spent 10 minutes observing. Through the living room window, he could see movement, 2 figures in what appeared to be intense conversation. Candy gesturing emphatically, a man's silhouette responding with defensive body language. They were arguing about something, probably about Joel's imminent arrival and how to handle Miranda's potential memories. Garrett's voice crackled through Joel's earpiece. Overwatch confirms 1 adult male inside. Matches Pearson's description. 2 vehicles in the garage. Back exit is clear, front door only approach. Joel had positioned Garrett and 2 other former military contractors in observation points around the neighborhood. Not for violence, not yet, but for intelligence and insurance. Everything that happened from this moment would be documented, recorded, and preserved for later use. Joel approached his own front door like an insertion operation, silent, purposeful, with every sense alert for changes in the environment. His key turned soundlessly in the lock, a skill developed during surprise inspections aboard submarines. The conversation inside stopped the moment he stepped into the foyer. "Joel." Candy's voice carried manufactured surprise. "You're early." Flight was ahead of schedule. Joel's voice remained neutral as he assessed the scene. Stanley Pearson stood near the living room window, nervous energy radiating from his posture. He was exactly as Joel remembered. Average height, soft around the middle, the kind of man who relied on charm because he lacked substance. "Stanley." Joel's acknowledgement was clinical. "Unexpected to see you here. I wanted to offer support during this difficult time." Stanley's voice carried forced casualness. "Candy and I served together at the base social events. We're friends." Joel noted the carefully neutral language. No admission of personal relationship, no indication of intimacy. They'd rehearsed this encounter. How thoughtful. "Where's Miranda?" "Resting upstairs," Candy said quickly. "Doctor's orders. She shouldn't be disturbed." "I'll be gentle." Joel moved toward the stairs with the steady pace of a man accustomed to command. Neither Candy nor Stanley attempted to stop him. Too obvious, too revealing of their desperation to control access to Miranda. Miranda's room was dim, curtains drawn against the afternoon sun. She lay in her bed, awake but staring at the ceiling with the unfocused gaze of someone still processing trauma. "Hey, little sailor." Joel's voice softened as he sat beside her bed. Miranda turned toward him, and Joel saw intelligence behind the exhaustion. His daughter was thinking, remembering, trying to piece together fragments of a shattered experience. "Daddy." Her voice was stronger than it had been on the phone. "I'm glad you're home." "Me too. How are you feeling?" "Better." "But..." Miranda glanced toward the door, then leaned closer. "Mom says I fell down the stairs, but I remember being in my room. I remember arguing voices downstairs, then coming down to see what was wrong." Joel kept his expression neutral while his tactical mind processed this information. "What do you remember about coming downstairs?" "Mom and a man were in the living room. They were close. Too close. I said something, and the man got angry. He grabbed my arm, and I tried to pull away." Miranda's voice faltered. That's when everything went black. Every detail confirmed Joel's tactical assessment. Miranda had surprised them. Stanley had panicked and struck her. Then they'd moved her to the base of the stairs to support their cover story. Miranda, this is important. Do you remember the man's face? I think so. He had dark hair, kind of chubby. I'd seen him before. He came by when you were deployed. Miranda's eyes sharpened with sudden clarity. Daddy, Mom lied about what happened, didn't she? Joel felt the last vestige of doubt evaporate. His 16-year-old daughter had provided eyewitness testimony that would destroy Candy and Stanley's deception completely. Yes, she did. But we're going to fix that. Joel squeezed Miranda's hand. I need you to rest now, but tomorrow we're going to have some important conversations with some people who will want to hear exactly what you remember. Am I in trouble? No, sweetheart. You're the victim here, and you're also the hero. You're going to help make sure the right people face consequences for what they did. Joel kissed Miranda's forehead and returned downstairs, where Candy and Stanley waited with transparent anxiety. How is she? Candy asked. Recovering well. Her memory seems to be coming back. Joel watched both their faces carefully. Stanley's complexion went pale. Candy's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. That's good, Stanley said. Head trauma can be tricky. Sometimes people remember things that didn't actually happen. Joel smiled, the same expression he wore when enemy submarines revealed their positions. Miranda's always been very observant. Accurate, too. She takes after her father that way. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Joel was letting them know that their deception was blown, their cover story compromised, and their time was running out. Well, Stanley said, moving toward the door with obvious haste, I should let you family have some time together. Candy, call if you need anything. Joel watched through the window as Stanley departed, noting that he drove the silver Honda rather than his registered pickup truck. Still being careful, still hoping to avoid detection. But it was far too late for caution. I'm exhausted, Candy announced. I think I'll take a bath and turn in early. Good idea. Joel's voice remained pleasant. Tomorrow's going to be a very busy day. As Candy retreated upstairs, Joel activated his encrypted phone and sent a single message to Garrett. Operation approved. Execute Phase 2. The war had officially begun. Chapter 5. Intelligence Gathering. Joel rose at 0500 hours, a habit ingrained by 15 years of military discipline. He moved through his morning routine with mechanical precision while Candy slept. Coffee, shower, review of overnight intelligence reports from Garrett's team. The surveillance had been productive. Stanley Pearson had spent the previous evening at his rental house, making numerous phone calls and consuming significant quantities of alcohol. His behavior suggested a man under extreme stress, making increasingly desperate decisions. More importantly, Garrett's technical specialist had successfully installed monitoring devices in both Stanley's house and his vehicles during the night. Every conversation, every phone call, every movement would now be recorded and analyzed. Joel's secure laptop displayed a real-time feed from Stanley's kitchen, where the man was currently pacing while speaking on his phone to someone identified as Bernice, Stanley's sister in Richmond. I'm telling you, this whole thing is falling apart. Stanley's voice came through clearly. The husband's back, and the kid is remembering things. Kenny thinks we can ride it out, but I'm not so sure. Joel increased the volume as Bernice's voice responded. Stanley, you need to get out of there. This was stupid from the beginning. Messing around with a Navy officer's wife? What were you thinking? It wasn't supposed to happen like this. The girl wasn't supposed to get hurt. But she did get hurt, and now you're looking at assault charges if she talks. Maybe attempted murder if they decide it wasn't an accident. Joel saved the recording and immediately forwarded it to Marcus Nolan, Preston's detective brother. This conversation alone would provide probable cause for arrest warrants, but Joel wanted more than arrests. He wanted total destruction. Upstairs, Candy was stirring. Joel heard the shower running, her daily routine beginning. He had perhaps 30 minutes before she came downstairs, 30 minutes to review his daughter's testimony with a clear, objective mind. Miranda appeared in the kitchen at 0630, moving carefully but independently. The head trauma was healing faster than expected, another indication that the injuries had been inflicted by an amateur who'd panicked rather than someone with genuine intent to cause permanent harm. How do you feel about talking to some police officers today? Joel asked as he poured orange juice for both of them. Nervous, but ready. Miranda's voice carried determination that made Joel proud. I want to tell the truth about what happened. The truth is all we need. Candy emerged 20 minutes later, dressed for success in a sharp business suit and carrying her real estate portfolio. Maintaining normalcy, keeping up appearances. I have 3 showings today, she announced. Miranda, stay home and rest. Joel, maybe you could take some leave to help with her recovery? Already arranged. I'll be staying close to home for the foreseeable future. Something in Joel's tone made Candy pause, her real estate smile faltering slightly. She was beginning to sense that the dynamics had shifted, that her control over the situation was slipping. That's good. Families should stick together during difficult times. After Candy left, Joel made 2 phone calls. The first was to Detective Elias Davidson, not the doctor from the hospital, but Marcus Nolan's partner in the Virginia Beach Police Department's Special Victims Unit. Davidson specialized in domestic violence and family assault cases, with a particular expertise in situations involving staged accidents. The second call was to Lieutenant Roberto Marks, Joel's former executive officer and current JAG Corps attorney. Roberto had left active duty to practice civilian law, but maintained his security clearance and his connections within the military justice system. Both men agreed to meet at Joel's house that afternoon to interview Miranda and review the evidence Garrett had compiled. Joel spent the morning with his daughter, helping her prepare for the interview while simultaneously gathering additional intelligence on Stanley's background. The picture that emerged was of a man with a pattern of predatory behavior toward military wives, financial problems, and a history of violence when confronted with consequences for his actions. At 1,400 hours, Detective Davidson and Attorney Marks arrived simultaneously, followed by Garrett's unmarked surveillance van. Joel's living room transformed into a command center, with recording equipment, legal documents, and tactical communications. Miranda's interview was devastating for Candy and Stanley's defense. She described the scene in clinical detail. Her mother embracing a man she recognized from previous visits, her confrontation with him, Stanley's violent response, and her certainty that the fall down the stairs was staged after she'd lost consciousness. This is textbook assault with intent to cover up adultery, Davidson concluded. Combined with the surveillance evidence and phone recordings, we have multiple felony charges. What's the timeline for arrests? Joel asked. I can have warrants by tomorrow morning, but I want to coordinate with the district attorney's office to ensure we're maximizing charges. This isn't just assault. It's conspiracy, false reporting, insurance fraud if they file claims, and potentially attempted murder if we can prove intent. Roberto reviewed the legal implications while Garrett provided additional surveillance footage. The case was solid, overwhelming, completely devastating for both defendants. But Joel wasn't satisfied with legal justice alone. I need them to understand the full scope of their mistake, Joel said quietly. Prison sentences are just the beginning. Davidson and Roberto exchanged glances, recognizing the tone of a man who had calculated beyond conventional justice. Joel, Roberto said carefully, whatever you're planning, make sure it stays within legal boundaries. These people aren't worth compromising your career or freedom. Joel's smile was arctic. Everything I'm planning is completely legal, but that doesn't mean it will be merciful. As the meeting concluded, Joel activated his next phase, financial warfare. By evening, both Candy and Stanley would discover that their credit had been destroyed, their employment terminated, and their assets frozen pending criminal investigation. The submarine had surfaced, and Joel Byers was bringing the full weight of his network to bear against the people who had dared to hurt his daughter. Chapter 6. Battle Stations. The arrest occurred at dawn, synchronized with military precision. Detective Davidson took Stanley at his rental house, while a separate unit arrested Candy at her real estate office. Joel observed both operations from Garrett's mobile command center, watching as his wife and her lover learned that their world had collapsed overnight. Stanley offered no resistance, seeming almost relieved that the charade was finally over. Candy fought like a cornered animal, demanding lawyers, claiming innocence, insisting that this was all a misunderstanding that could be resolved through rational conversation. Neither understood that rational conversation had ended the moment they decided to hurt Miranda. Joel's phone buzzed with a call from Roberto Marx. Both suspects are in custody. Stanley's already talking. Apparently, he wants to make a deal. Candy's demanding a high-end criminal attorney and claiming she's the victim of a vindictive husband. What's Stanley offering? Full confession to the assault in exchange for reduced charges. He's claiming it was accidental, that he never intended to hurt Miranda seriously. Says Candy pressured him into staging the fall to avoid investigation. Joel processed this information tactically. Stanley was attempting to save himself by sacrificing Candy. Predictable behavior from a man who'd already demonstrated cowardice and poor judgment. What about Candy's position? Denying everything. Claims Stanley was just a friend offering support, that Miranda's memory is compromised by head trauma, that you're orchestrating this because you want custody in a divorce. Interesting strategy, considering the surveillance evidence. Her attorney seems confident they can create reasonable doubt. Rich suburban housewife versus dishonorably discharged ex-Navy with a history of violence. Jury sympathy could favor her if they can discredit Stanley's testimony. Joel's smile was predatory. Candy's legal strategy revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of the battlefield. She was fighting a conventional war, while Joel had already deployed unconventional weapons. Roberto, what's the maximum possible sentence if both are convicted on all charges? Stanley's looking at 8 to 12 years. Candy could get 5 to 8, possibly more if we can prove conspiracy and premeditation. Not enough. Joel, that's substantial prison time. Prison is temporary. What I have planned is permanent. Joel disconnected and activated Phase 3 of his operation. Over the next 6 hours, a carefully orchestrated campaign would destroy both Stanley and Candy's ability to rebuild their lives after incarceration. First, social media warfare. Garrett's cyber specialist unleashed a coordinated release of evidence across multiple platforms. Security footage of Stanley leaving Joel's house. Audio recordings of his confession to his sister. Financial records showing Candy's payments to Stanley. Medical records documenting Miranda's injuries. Within hours, the story had gone viral. Navy wife's affair leads to daughter's assault. Local news stations picked up the story, followed by regional outlets, then national coverage. Candy's real estate company immediately terminated her employment to avoid association with the scandal. Stanley's few remaining friends and family members began publicly distancing themselves. Second, financial destruction. Joel's military contacts included specialists in economic warfare, men who understood how to dismantle someone's financial life without leaving fingerprints. Candy discovered that her credit cards had been canceled, her bank accounts frozen pending investigation, and her professional licenses suspended. Stanley found himself evicted from his rental house and unable to secure employment due to his rapidly expanding criminal record. Third, social isolation. Joel had maintained relationships with the wives of other military officers throughout his career, women who understood the unique challenges of deployment marriages and the absolute importance of family loyalty. A whisper campaign began, spreading through military communities across the country. Candy Byers had betrayed her husband's trust and endangered her own daughter for the sake of an affair. The social consequences were devastating. Military communities were small, interconnected networks where reputation was everything. Candy would never again be welcome at base functions, military social events, or anywhere that Navy families gathered. But Joel's masterstroke was psychological warfare, targeting their deepest fears and insecurities. For Stanley, Joel arranged for certain information to reach other inmates at the county jail, specifically that Stanley had assaulted a teenage girl. In prison hierarchies, crimes against children occupied the lowest rung. Stanley would spend his incarceration in protective custody, isolated and terrorized by the knowledge that every other inmate considered him legitimate prey. For Candy, Joel's campaign was more subtle but equally devastating. He systematically contacted every client she'd worked with over the past 2 years, every professional association she belonged to, every social connection she'd cultivated. The message was consistent. Candy Byers was a woman who betrayed trust, who chose personal gratification over family loyalty, who couldn't be relied upon in any capacity. By evening, both Stanley and Candy had learned that their arrests were merely the beginning of their punishment. The legal system would confine them temporarily, but Joel's retribution would follow them for the rest of their lives. Miranda watched the news coverage from her bedroom, still recovering, but alert enough to understand that her father was systematically destroying the people who had hurt her. "Daddy," she asked when Joel came to check on her, "is this really necessary? They're already going to prison." Joel sat beside her bed, his expression softening for the only person who could still reach his humanity. "Sweetheart, some people understand mercy. Others only understand overwhelming force. Your mother and Stanley made a choice when they decided to hurt you. Now, they get to live with the consequences of that choice forever. Will we be okay? We'll be better than okay. We'll be free of people who don't deserve our trust or loyalty." As Miranda drifted off to sleep, Joel returned to his command center. Tomorrow would bring the final phase of his operation, the psychological breaking point that would ensure Stanley Pearson and Candy Byers never again posed a threat to anyone Joel cared about. The submarine commander had surfaced completely, and his enemies were about to discover that Joel Byers' capacity for strategic patience was matched only by his capacity for absolute, merciless revenge. Chapter 7. Full Assault. Joel stood in the courthouse corridor, watching through reinforced glass as Stanley Pearson shuffled toward the defendant's table in chains and orange jumpsuit. 3 days in county jail had transformed Stanley from nervous confidence to barely contained terror. His face carried the pallor of a man who discovered that his fellow inmates considered child assault an unforgivable crime. "He's asking for solitary confinement," Detective Davidson informed Joel. "Claims other prisoners are threatening him." "What did you tell him?" "That protective custody is earned, not guaranteed. He needs to demonstrate good faith cooperation with our investigation." Joel's smile carried no warmth. Stanley's desperation was exactly where Joel wanted him: psychologically broken, socially isolated, and willing to do anything to minimize his suffering. Candy entered the courtroom with her high-priced attorney, a silver-haired shark named Oliver Lockwood, who specialized in defending wealthy defendants against embarrassing charges. She'd managed to make bail through her family's money, but the 3 days in custody had stripped away her veneer of suburban sophistication. Dark circles under her eyes, nervous fidgeting, constant glances toward the gallery where Joel sat with Miranda. Roberto Marx approached with final updates. "Stanley's attorney is pushing hard for a plea bargain. Full confession, complete cooperation, testimony against Candy in exchange for minimum sentencing. The DA's considering it. And Candy's position? Still claiming innocence. Lockwood thinks he can convince a jury that Stanley acted alone, that Candy was as much a victim as Miranda." Joel studied his wife's profile as she conferred with her attorney. Candy still believed she could manipulate her way out of consequences, that her charm and social status would overcome evidence and testimony. She was about to learn otherwise. "Your Honor," the prosecutor began, "the state has additional evidence that has come to light since the defendant's arrest." Joel watched as Garrett entered the courtroom carrying a sealed evidence box. Inside were recordings, photographs, and financial documents that would obliterate any remaining doubt about Candy's guilt. The prosecutor activated a digital display showing bank records. "Mrs. Byers has been financially supporting Mr. Pearson for 6 months, paying his rent, utilities, and personal expenses totaling over $15,000. Additionally, cell phone records show 347 calls between the defendants during Lieutenant Commander Byers' deployment." Candy's face drained of color as each piece of evidence destroyed her claims of innocence. The financial support proved premeditation. The phone records demonstrated ongoing conspiracy. Together, they painted a picture of calculated betrayal rather than momentary weakness. Furthermore, the prosecutor continued, "We have surveillance footage from the defendant's neighborhood showing Mr. Pearson's vehicle at the Byers' residence on 17 separate occasions during the past month, always during business hours when Mrs. Byers should have been at work." Stanley's attorney raised his hand desperately. Your Honor, my client wishes to formally accept the state's plea offer and provide full testimony. Mr. Pearson, the judge asked, do you understand that you're waiving your right to trial and agreeing to testify against your co-defendant? Stanley's voice was barely audible. Yes, Your Honor. I want to tell the truth about what happened. Joel watched Candy's expression as her lover publicly betrayed her. Shock, rage, desperation, and finally a kind of broken recognition that her carefully constructed world was disintegrating. Stanley's testimony was comprehensive and devastating. He admitted to the affair, described their plan to wait out Joel's deployment, and provided explicit details about Miranda's assault. Most damaging, he revealed that Candy had suggested staging the fall to avoid investigation. She said we needed to make it look like an accident, Stanley testified. Said her husband would never question a simple fall, especially if he was stuck underwater during the investigation. Candy's attorney objected repeatedly, claiming Stanley's testimony was unreliable and self-serving, but the evidence supported every detail. Financial records, phone logs, surveillance footage, and Miranda's own testimony created an unbreakable chain of proof. When Miranda took the stand, her testimony was calm, precise, and utterly damning. She described the scene she'd witnessed, Stanley's violent response, and her certainty that the fall had been staged while she was unconscious. I remember my mother checking my pulse before calling 911, Miranda said quietly. She waited to make sure I was still alive before reporting the accident. The gallery erupted in whispers. Even Candy's own family members, who'd attended to support her, looked shocked by the implications. Candy hadn't just covered up the assault. She'd calculated whether her daughter would survive before deciding how to proceed. Joel felt a cold satisfaction as the jury absorbed this revelation. Candy had revealed herself as a woman capable of prioritizing her own interests over her daughter's life. No amount of legal maneuvering could overcome that fundamental betrayal of maternal instinct. During recess, Joel intercepted Candy outside the women's restroom. They faced each other in the empty hallway, husband and wife, now irreconcilable enemies. This isn't over, Candy said quietly. You think you've won, but I still have options. What options? Joel's voice carried the same clinical detachment he used during combat briefings. Your lover has confessed. Your daughter has testified against you. Your finances are frozen. Your career is destroyed, and your reputation is permanently ruined. I could claim you've been abusive. Say this whole thing is revenge for a marriage that was already failing. Joel's smile was genuinely amused. Try it. I have 15 years of military service records, clean psychological evaluations, and testimony from dozens of fellow officers about my character. You have a history of infidelity, financial irresponsibility, and now attempted murder of your own daughter. Candy's composure finally cracked. Tears streamed down her face as she realized the full scope of her situation. Please, we can work this out. I made mistakes, but I never meant for Miranda to get hurt. You chose Stanley over Miranda the moment you let him into our house. You chose him again when you staged her accident. You've been choosing him over our family for months. Joel's voice never rose above conversational level. Now you get to live with those choices. As the trial resumed, Joel felt the satisfaction of a submarine commander whose torpedoes had found their target. Both Stanley and Candy would face maximum sentences, but more importantly, they would face social destruction that would follow them for the rest of their lives. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Stanley received 12 years for assault, conspiracy, and false reporting. Candy received 15 years for the same charges, plus additional time for child endangerment and conspiracy to commit insurance fraud. But Joel's real victory wasn't the prison sentences. It was the knowledge that when Stanley and Candy eventually returned to society, they would find a world where everyone knew exactly what they had done to Miranda Byers and her family. Justice, Joel reflected, wasn't just about punishment. It was about ensuring that betrayal carried permanent consequences. Chapter 8. Scorched Earth. 6 months after the trial, Joel stood in the empty shell of what had been Candy's real estate office, watching workers remove the last traces of her former life. The building's new tenant, a cybersecurity firm owned by one of Garrett's associates, was renovating the space completely. Miranda waited in the car outside, no longer requiring constant supervision, but still preferring to stay close to her father during these final cleanup operations. Her physical recovery had been remarkable, but the psychological healing would take longer. Trust, once shattered, was rebuilt slowly and selectively. Joel's phone buzzed with an update from Roberto Marx. Pearson's parole hearing denied. Earliest possibility, now 2035. Candy's appeal rejected by state Supreme Court. Both defendants officially exhausted all legal options. Joel saved the message and forwarded copies to his intelligence network. Stanley and Candy's legal fates were sealed, but Joel's campaign had always extended beyond the courtroom. Prison had broken Stanley completely. Garrett's contacts inside the correctional system reported that Stanley spent most of his time in protective custody, had attempted suicide twice, and showed signs of severe psychological deterioration. He would likely serve his full sentence in isolation, emerging as a broken man incapable of rebuilding any meaningful life. Candy had proven more resilient, maintaining her innocence and attempting to organize other inmates behind claims of prosecutorial misconduct. But her efforts were undermined by the simple fact that everyone, guards, inmates, and staff, knew exactly what she'd done to her own daughter. Maternal betrayal was universally despised, even in prison. More importantly, Joel's external campaign had ensured that both defendants faced permanent social exile. Their names appeared on dozens of websites dedicated to documenting crimes against children. Their photographs and conviction details were preserved in databases that would be discovered by any future employer, landlord, or potential partner. Joel had also quietly contacted Candy's extended family, parents, siblings, cousins, providing them with complete documentation of her crimes. The family had responded by formally disowning her, removing her from wills and trusts, and making it clear that she would receive no support upon release. Stanley's situation was even worse. His sister Bernice, whose recorded conversation had provided crucial evidence, had changed her name and moved across the country to escape association with his crimes. His few remaining friends had publicly denounced him after news coverage revealed his pattern of targeting military wives. "Daddy," Miranda's voice came through Joel's earpiece. "Are you finished in there?" "Almost done, sweetheart." Joel took a final photograph of the empty office, then joined his daughter in the car. "How are you feeling?" "Good. Ready to move forward." Miranda's voice carried a strength that made Joel proud. His daughter had endured betrayal and violence, but she'd emerged with her integrity intact and her loyalty uncompromised. They drove through Virginia Beach toward their new house, a fortress-like structure in a gated community where Joel could ensure his daughter's absolute security. The old house had been sold within days to another Navy family, its association with scandal apparently having minimal impact on market value. Joel's own life had stabilized into a new pattern. He'd accepted promotion to full commander and a position at the Pentagon, allowing him to remain close to Miranda while advancing his career. His military reputation had actually been enhanced by the scandal. Colleagues respected his methodical response to family crisis and his refusal to let personal betrayal compromise his professional duties. More importantly, Joel's network had expanded significantly during the operation against Candy and Stanley. Military officers, law enforcement contacts, private security specialists, and intelligence analysts had all contributed to the campaign. These relationships would prove valuable for future challenges, and everyone involved understood that Joel Byers was a man who protected his allies and destroyed his enemies with equal efficiency. "There's something I want to show you," Joel said as they approached their new neighborhood. He handed Miranda a manila folder containing photographs and documents. Miranda opened the folder and found herself looking at surveillance photos of Stanley in prison, hollow-eyed, skeletal, obviously broken by his incarceration. Additional photos showed Candy during her recent parole hearing, where she'd been denied early release despite claims of good behavior and rehabilitation. "I want you to understand," Joel said quietly, that the people who hurt you will never recover from the consequences of their choices. They'll never again be in a position to harm anyone's family. Miranda studied the photographs with the analytical intelligence she'd inherited from her father. They looked destroyed. Completely. Their lives, as they knew them, ended the day they decided to assault you. Everything since then has been just the slow realization of that fact. As they pulled into their new driveway, Miranda asked the question Joel had been expecting. Do you think I'll ever be able to trust people again? Joel considered his answer carefully. His daughter deserved honesty, not comforting platitudes. You'll learn to trust selectively, he said finally. You'll become very good at reading people's true character before allowing them close enough to hurt you. And you'll never again tolerate betrayal from anyone, no matter what relationship they claim with you. Like you. Exactly like me. Joel's smile carried genuine warmth for the first time in months. Some people call it being ruthless. I call it being realistic about human nature. They entered their new home together, father and daughter, survivors of a war that had taught them both the value of absolute loyalty and the cost of misplaced trust. Outside, Garrett's security team maintained discreet surveillance, ensuring that Joel's family would never again be vulnerable to attack from those they should have been able to trust. The submarine had finally found safe harbor, but its weapons remained armed and ready for anyone foolish enough to threaten what Joel Byers protected. Chapter 9. Surface Victory. 2 years later, Joel stood on the deck of the USS Normandy, his new command vessel, watching the sun set over the Pacific. His promotion to captain had come with assignment to one of the Navy's most advanced destroyers, recognition of his tactical brilliance and uncompromising leadership style. More importantly, it came with the knowledge that his reputation had been forged not just through military excellence, but through his methodical destruction of anyone who threatened his family. Miranda, now 18 and preparing for the Naval Academy, had grown into a formidable young woman who combined her father's analytical mind with a steely determination born from surviving betrayal. She'd chosen to follow Joel's path into military service, understanding that strength was the only reliable protection against a world filled with people willing to exploit trust for personal gain. Joel's secure phone buzzed with a message from Garrett. Final report enclosed. Both subjects confirmed neutralized permanently. The attached file contained updates Joel had been expecting. Stanley Pearson had died in prison 6 months ago, officially from complications related to chronic malnutrition and self-inflicted injuries, but more accurately from the psychological destruction Joel had orchestrated. Stanley had simply lost the will to continue existing. Candy's fate had been different, but equally final. Released after serving minimum sentence for good behavior, she discovered that Joel's social campaign had been even more effective than anticipated. Unable to find employment, housing, or social acceptance anywhere in the United States, she'd attempted to rebuild her life in Mexico. The attempt had failed catastrophically. Joel's international contacts, developed through years of military deployment, had ensured that Candy's criminal record and the details of her crimes followed her across borders. She died in a car accident outside Tijuana, driving drunk after losing her final appeal for asylum and protection. Joel felt no satisfaction from their deaths, only the cold completion of a tactical mission. Stanley and Candy had threatened his daughter, betrayed his trust, and demonstrated their willingness to prioritize their own desires over an innocent child's welfare. Their destruction had been inevitable from the moment they'd made those choices. Preston Nolan, now Joel's executive officer, approached with evening reports. Captain, all departments secured for the night. Any special orders? Maintain standard watch rotation. I'll be in my quarters reviewing tomorrow's training exercises. Joel's quarters aboard the Normandy were even more Spartan than his submarine cabin had been. A narrow bunk, a desk for charts and communications, and a single photograph. Miranda, in her academy uniform, smiling with the confident pride of someone who understood her own strength. Joel opened his laptop and reviewed intelligence reports from his growing network of contacts. Military officers whose wives had been targeted by predators like Stanley. Law enforcement officials who understood the importance of protecting military families. private security specialists who shared Joel's philosophy about permanent solutions to recurring problems. Over the past 2 years, Joel had quietly assisted in 17 similar situations. Unfaithful spouses who'd endangered their children. Civilian criminals who'd targeted military families during deployments. Financial predators who'd exploited military wives' loneliness and isolation. In each case, Joel had provided tactical advice, resource connections, and strategic planning to ensure that threats were neutralized completely and permanently. His network had grown into an informal but highly effective organization dedicated to protecting military families from those who would exploit their service and sacrifice. None of these operations had required violence. Joel's reputation was now sufficient that most threats retreated when they learned of his involvement. Word had spread through military communities that Captain Joel Byers was a man who protected his allies with the same methodical precision he used to destroy his enemies. Joel's phone rang with a call from Miranda, now in her second year at Annapolis. "Hi, Dad. How's the Pacific treating you?" "Same as always. Vast, unpredictable, and full of hidden threats." "How are your studies?" "Challenging, but manageable. I'm particularly enjoying the tactical courses. Professor says I have an instinct for strategic thinking." Joel smiled at the pride in his daughter's voice. "That's genetic. Your grandfather was the same way during his Army service." "Dad, there's something I wanted to ask you." Miranda's tone became more serious. "Some of my classmates have been asking about what happened to Mom and Stanley. There's still news articles online, and people are curious. What do you tell them?" "The truth. That they chose to betray our family and assault me, and that they face the appropriate consequences for those choices." "How do people respond?" "Most are supportive. Military families understand that loyalty isn't negotiable. But a few seem to think you went too far, that everyone deserves second chances and forgiveness." Joel considered his response carefully. His daughter was old enough to understand the philosophical implications of his choices, mature enough to make her own decisions about mercy and justice. "Miranda, what do you think about second chances?" "I think second chances are earned through genuine repentance and changed behavior. I think some actions, like assaulting your lover's daughter to cover up adultery, demonstrate character flaws that can't be reformed." Miranda's voice carried the same clinical detachment Joel used during tactical assessments. "I think Mom and Stanley got exactly what they deserved. And the people who criticize that position, they've never been betrayed by someone they trusted completely. They don't understand that some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt." Joel felt a deep satisfaction listening to his daughter's analysis. Miranda had inherited his strategic mind, but more importantly, she learned the crucial lesson that survival required the ability to identify and eliminate threats without sentiment or hesitation. "I'm proud of you," Joel said simply. "I learned from the best." After the call ended, Joel returned to his evening reports, but his mind remained focused on the larger picture. Miranda would graduate from the academy in 2 years, begin her own military career, and eventually face her own challenges with loyalty and betrayal. When that time came, she would be prepared. She would understand that mercy was a luxury reserved for those who had earned it, that trust was granted selectively and withdrawn permanently when abused, and that the only reliable protection against betrayal was the demonstrated capacity for overwhelming retaliation. Joel had spent 4 years transforming his personal tragedy into a comprehensive victory. Stanley and Candy were dead. Miranda was thriving. His own career had advanced beyond his highest expectations, and his network of allies had grown into a force capable of protecting military families throughout the Navy. Standing on the deck of his destroyer, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky, Captain Joel Byers understood that he had achieved something few men ever managed: absolute victory over those who had dared to threaten what he protected. The submarine had not only surfaced, but had become the flagship